How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Some idea.
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them. I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do, and this influences my thinking and consequently my action.
What is it you're trying to do with your life?
Play the piano for people.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.
is the end. There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? I'm burning in the dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the dystopia. This is the final time. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the dystopia. This is the final
Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome to The Cult. The Cult is a show that I stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube, on X, a platform formerly known as Twitter, and on Rumble, where we talk about basically whatever I feel like talking about on any given day. We do deep dives into the far left. We sometimes do deep dives into the far right. We sometimes, laugh and have fun and those types of things too. Now, on Thursdays, we are doing a new thing, which is every Thursday at 5 p.m. It is Thursday, right? Am I making this up? It is actually Thursday. I'm like, it is. It is Thursday. You know what? Listen, it's been a long and crazy week. It's been so forgive me if I don't know that it's Thursday. But, I did know enough to know it's not Friday. I know it's not Friday. My husband is way too excited on Fridays for it to be Friday yet. No, but it is Thursday, and on Thursdays we're doing a new thing, which is we're going to do a live recording of the Counterrevolutionary Book Club. The Counterrevolutionary Book Club is where we read the left's most dystopian materials, and then we talk about it. And we read it all together on the screen, and we break down the language, and we kind of think about what that means and how it applies in the real world. And these types of materials are materials that I don't see anyone else covering on the internet. I don't even think that most people who cover the left know that these materials exist, because what we're doing is we're not going back into the philosophy that people have analyzed a million ways from Sunday. We're going into the anarchist counterculture, the anarcho-communist counterculture, and the subcultures that they have. And they write a lot of things in these subcultures, and the things that they write, from the manifestos to the communiques to the zines to whatever they're putting together, a pamphlet, whatever it is hugely influential on today's activists. It's not that today's activists are not reading Marx or Marcuse or Hegel or any of those things. They read it. They read it in college. But what is more influential, I believe, and what I'm quite literally willing to stake my work on, what I think is more influential are the materials that are being created in their subcultures, in the anarcho-communist subcultures. Again, we're talking about the manifestos, we're talking about the communiques, we're talking about the zines, we're talking about the papers that they write, and they distribute them on anarchist websites. They have their own anarchist websites. You can also find things like the Anarchist Library and stuff like that. And I think that that is what today's activists are reading. I think that's what today's activists are interacting with. These are the types of materials that we see show up again over and over and over on webinars. We have absolutely found them cited in college classes. And if you didn't know what you were looking for, you wouldn't know what it was. But because we read these materials, we were able to identify, oh yeah, that was actually cited in that paper at Harvard, or that was cited in that paper in the University of California system. So it's not that they're just reading this stuff in their spare time. They are integrating it with their college coursework because a lot of this stuff is created by people coming out of academia. And so I think it's important to read this stuff, and I think it's important to do it together, because what I found with book clubs is that if I just leave you all to your own devices, you won't do the reading. You show up to the book club because you want to hang out and you want to have good discussion, and then no one does the reading. And then we all sit there and stare at each other. And this has happened to me repeatedly in book clubs before. So I know what's going on. And so I decided we were going to read all this stuff together, because lucky us, anarcho-communists don't believe in intellectual property. And so if they don't believe in intellectual property, that means I can read all their stuff on my stream and they can't do anything about it. So today for Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, guys, and if you've never been to Counter-Revolutionary Book Club before, the place you want to start is over on the Substack. And that is Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. And what you want to do is you want to go to the book club link at the very, very, very top. And in that link, you will find this link right here, the dystopian documents queer and gender activists are reading. It is always and perpetually at the very top of the page. And then we today are reading a document called Queering Anarchism. So you can find the document on the website. You can also click on this link to go to the anarchist library, where it does all exist for free. We are reading a book called Queering Anarchism. This is a book of essays. So this is a bunch of disparate essays written by a lot of different people, but there's a lot of these essays. So we are now on part 3 of this book. We're making our way through it. The essays are relatively short, so we should be able to bang out a bunch. We are starting today at Police at the Border. And then apparently we're going to read Aren't We All Very Public Sluts? Will the Real Queer Please Stand Up? Pressured to Poly Towards a Queerer Conclusion. They've also got stuff on gender sabotage. We will see how far we get in the essay collection today. And that's what we're going to be doing. So if you have not joined us before, it's okay. You didn't miss out on anything, because this is an essay collection, so you can literally jump in at any time. And of course, if people have questions or comments as we're making our way through this, please feel free to chat in. We will try to answer all questions. Counter-Revolutionary Book Club tends to be a lesser attended stream, which is a little disappointing to me, because I actually think that this is the most interesting stream. Listen, I could stream about Candace Owens and get hundreds of people here. I could stream about Tim Pool and get hundreds of people here. I really wish people were more interested in this stuff, because this is the crazy stuff. And I know it's hard to read sometimes, but we make it fun and we break it down. But you will never read anything crazier than when you're getting into queer dystopian manifestos and essays and things like that. It is like you are walking into the dystopian nightmare, except this is all real. This is not a book of fiction. These are things that real people believe in the real world. And they put their ideas on paper, and they put their ideas out in activist circles. And then all of a sudden it becomes real, and all your kids think they're non-binary. And you wonder where all this stuff came from. Well, I'll tell you exactly where it came from. It came from this. This is where this came from. The fact that genderqueer is taught in schools came from this. The fact that your kids think that gender is a spectrum that you can change as easy as you change your outfit, it came from this. All of these ideas come from somewhere. They didn't pop up out of nowhere. They were not created by Obama. None of that. This stuff's been around for a long time. So if you don't know where the ideas are coming from, the chances of you being able to solve the ideas are pretty slim. And that's why we do Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, so we can go back and learn about the ideas. And hopefully at some point, people pay attention and they listen. I will say I've actually been really happy with the numbers that the podcast of this is receiving. So if you would prefer to listen to the podcast, there is an audio podcast. I haven't put last week's episode up yet. My apologies. I had a crazy week, as you guys know. So I do have the episode done from last week. I'm going to put it up along with this one very soon. But if you would rather listen to the podcast, it is available on Apple Podcasts. It's available on Spotify. You can, of course, always always download the Substack app and listen to the podcast in the Substack if you prefer that. So these episodes are pretty long. These are like 1 to 2 hour episodes. And so it gives you a good deep dive into a whole bunch of essays. But I've been actually really happy with the numbers that the podcast has been doing. And I quite frankly wish my streaming would do a little bit better. That would be nice. But I know I'm like really shadow banned on YouTube at this point. It's actually kind of disgusting and gross how shadow banned I am on YouTube. But you know what? That's fine because the people who show up, and I hope that we are going to be able to get more people in here because I'm going to be doing a lot of outreach coming up. And before we get into the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, I want to talk about that because very, very, very exciting. And I did announce this over on the Substack, which again is Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. I have written a comprehensive report, what I think is the most comprehensive analysis of the major activist groups driving the pro-Palestine campus protest movement. As you guys know, we have been following the pro-Palestine protests since October 7th, quite frankly, because they didn't just start last April. We've been following this stuff for a long time. We have over like a year and a half worth of research into this now. We've been watching all these different groups. We watch their protests. We watch their live streams. We watch their social media posts. We know exactly who these groups are. We know exactly what they're doing. We read their literature. We read their manifestos. We read their pamphlets, all that stuff. So what I did is I did an analysis of that and I created a almost 70-page report that lists 30 of the groups that have been instrumental in driving the pro-Palestine protest movement on college campuses. Some of those groups are student groups. Some of those groups are not student groups. And it was actually a very fascinating process to go through because I started to see connections among the groups that I didn't know existed before. So it is actually a fascinating report. Now, you can find the link to it over on my Substack, but where this really lives is on my website, Decode the Left. That is decodetheleft.com. This is a project that I'm starting to try to take all of the primary source resources that we have amassed over the years, following the far left, tracking the far left, breaking down the far left, decoding the far left, doing all the things that we do with the far left. And I'm trying to take all that information and make it into actionable intelligence and analysis and research that people in the real world can use. So things like political candidates or people who work for political candidates, colleges and universities. I'm going to be sending out this report to a whole bunch of colleges and universities because they need to know this information in order to be able to deal with this problem. Community members, GOP members, whoever might be interested in the impact the left is having on the world, I want to create actionable intelligence based on all the primary source information we have to be able to give people what they need to make the best decisions. I want to be very clear. I kind of view this as a nonpartisan effort. I have a huge spectrum of people in my audience, everyone from disaffected lefties all the way up through, independents, libertarians, conservatives, regular Republicans, neocons, Christian nationalists. I even have national socialists who watch this channel. I don't agree with them. I have to say that because otherwise people will make assumptions. But I have a huge spectrum of beliefs in my audience. And I talked about this a little bit the other day. I no longer see myself as someone who, I don't consider myself to be an activist currently. I consider myself to be like a detached observer of all of this stuff. And what I want to do is provide people with grounded, hinged into reality information about what the left is doing. I do not think that this information is exclusively interesting to one group over another. And I've said this a million times. I will literally work with anyone, and I mean anyone, who wants to stop the more radical elements of the far left and what they're doing in our world. And I think that that includes a huge number of people. I think there are even people on the left who are more moderates, more centrists, who look at the far left and they're like, y'all are crazy. And they don't want them to win either. And of course, we know the far left they hate the moderates and the centrists. They hate the Democrats. They hate the liberals. They talk about it all the time. And so I want to make this information available to anyone who wants it, anyone who wants this type of analysis. And I don't view myself as a member of any political team, any political tribe. As you guys know, I didn't even vote for one of the major two candidates for president because I didn't really believe in either of them. And my suspicion, and listen, I always thought that Trump would probably be marginally better than Kamala Harris, but my suspicion about Trump has been confirmed, and all my worst fears are coming true with some of his policies. And I'm like, oh my God, it is actually going to be as bad as I thought it could potentially be, which is too bad. Honestly, I wish there was a politician in this world I could get behind. I wish there was a political party I could get behind and feel comfortable being a part of, but I'm going to be the outsider, I guess. And I'm the outsider of, I no longer care about convincing people to join my team or my tribe or any of these things. I'm not going to shill a tribalist narrative. I am interested in one thing and one thing only, and that is, what is the truth? What is the truth based on the evidence? And can we all just hinge back into reality and have a conversation? Because the world has gone insane, and we're seeing the ramifications of that all over the place. And I no longer want to be in a place where I'm fighting with people constantly. I just want to talk about what's going on. And I think that that is interesting and intriguing to a lot of people. Anyway, that's a very long-winded introduction to what Decode the Left is. I do have a couple resources that I've been launching. If you guys missed it, I did launch a guide to mapping the modern left, which we are going to be using to classify all of the different far left groups that we follow, all the way from Democrat all to revolutionary socialist. So we do now have a document where we can show people, if they're confused about the difference between Democrats and liberals and progressives and democratic socialists and actual revolutionary socialists, we now have a document and a framework that we can use to help them understand the difference. That was the very first thing I created for Decode the Left, because that's going to provide the foundation for a lot of analysis that we do. The newest document that I've created for Decode the Left is called The Campus Insurrection. And you can get there by going to, that's the report, but we're going to show that in a second. You can get there by going to decodetheleft.com/campus. You can also just go to the homepage and you'll find the link right there, because I know how to design websites and all that stuff. And what you're going to find here is a download link to a report. I'm going to show you through the report real quick. I also do want people to know that I will be doing a free public webinar on Wednesday, April 30th. At 2 p.m. Eastern time, in order to talk about the report, present the report, take questions from anyone who might be interested in it. If you have people in your community that are interested in this type of information, this is a great thing to share, guys, because this is completely free for anyone. Anyone can look at this. Anyone can sign up for the webinar. I think it'll be particularly useful for people like policymakers, university leaders, media that want to understand this. I think, but also just normal people who are like, what's going on in the world? Anyone can sign up for this and come get this information. So you can find that over on the website. And you'll see here that the report includes 30 detailed profiles of all of these different groups. It includes a full timeline of the protest escalation from October 7th all the way up until today. It includes a very clear analysis of where all their funding is coming from. And I think people might be surprised because, you know, listen, we like to make fun of the fact that the right says that George Soros funds everything. Well, it is not true that Soros funds everything, but there are organizations that are funded through the Open Society Foundation in this report, which is research that I came up. We have to be honest about this. There are absolutely some organizations that are funded through Open Society that are funded by George Soros. However, you're also going to see through the report that there are a lot of organizations that are involved in these campus protests that are not funded by George Soros. You're also going to see there are some organizations that are all funded by the same people. So did you guys know that the Party for Socialism and Liberation, the Answer Coalition, the People's Forum in New York City, and Breakthrough News are all funded by the same people? They're all funded by exactly the same people. They all work together. They're all run by the same people. They're all fun. I had no idea that Breakthrough News, which is a far left news outlet that has been covering the campus protests since the beginning. We watch Breakthrough News every now and again on the channel. I had no idea that they were literally funded by the same people funding the Party for Socialism and Liberation, or the People's Forum, or the Answer Coalition. All of these groups are interconnected, and this is why we see them showing up together over and over and over and over and over again. I just didn't know that the connection was that close. So these are and also they're all represented by the same lawyers. P.S. it's crazy the amount of coincidences that came up when I was doing the analysis, because we do have the funding breakdown for all of these different groups. Now, there are also some groups, there are many groups that are completely self-funded, that are funded by dues or merchandise sales or all the things that we know they do to fund themselves. And it is important to acknowledge where this money is coming from and how these connections are overlapping. One of my favorite parts of this report, one of the best parts of the analysis, I think, is that for every single group, I provided a series of recommendations, mostly targeted at university administrators or policymakers or people like that. I provided a list of tactical recommendations to explain to people, how do you negotiate with these groups, or how do you contain these groups? Are these groups even going to be willing to negotiate with you? What are the things you can offer them? What are the things that are not going to work and you should not do? Because we all know that one of the mistakes that Columbia University made at the very, 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 very beginning was Columbia University brought the NYPD onto campus. And that was the biggest mistake they made, was bringing the NYPD back onto campus after them not being allowed on campus since 1968. And the reason that was the biggest mistake that they could have possibly made is it really pissed off the students, because we know that there is nothing that these protesters, especially protesters like revolutionary groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, there is nothing these students hate more than the police. And so what happened when Columbia made the decision to allow the NYPD onto campus is they just blew the problem significantly out of proportion. So the protests actually, I think, doubled and then quadrupled in size like 2 days later, based on the fact that they brought the police onto campus. That was an unforced error. And had they known more about the groups that they were negotiating with, I think they could have handled it a whole lot better. Then you have some universities, like I think Rutgers. Well, Rutgers is a very left university, but Rutgers was able to negotiate with the protesters to give them a couple of things. And I forget exactly what they gave them. I think they may have given them like a concession that they were going to have a discussion about divestment or something like that. And that made the protesters go away a lot quicker. So there are ways to handle all these different groups, but you have to understand what you're dealing with, and you have to understand what negotiation tactics are going to be effective and not effective. So every single group that I profiled in the report does actually have a tactical analysis of, here's what you need to know about dealing with this particular group should you find yourself on the receiving end of having to do that. Okay. There's a lot of other stuff in the report too, guys. As you can see from, this is the actual PDF of the report. It is not a small, insignificant report. It isn't. This is the table of contents. See all these different groups. It is almost 70 pages long. Also, it does follow, I just told you guys about the mapping the modern left framework that I created. It does follow the mapping the modern left framework, so you can see exactly how many of these groups are revolutionary socialist groups. You can see exactly how many are democratic socialists, exactly how many are progressive. Spoiler alert, most of the groups are revolutionary socialist groups. And even when groups were progressive, they're still oftentimes using revolutionary messaging to try to appeal to those more radical elements. So that was another fascinating part of the report, was just which category on the left do these people belong in? How far left are they? I think that information is extremely valuable to people who have to analyze this or deal with this information. And then you'll see, this is, let's see, let me get into a profile. So we've got Students for Justice in Palestine as our first profile. We've got an overview of the group. We've got the ideology of the group. We've got the tactics that you can expect the group to use. We've got the organizational structure of the group, how they're communicating, how they're coordinating. We've got the funding of the group. We have the legal support of the group, so we know who their lawyers are. We have the notable actions that this group has been involved in. Of course, for many of these groups, there are more, but we picked the most notable ones for the report. We can always add more later, I guess, if we want to. There is a strategic role that all these groups play in terms of the service that they do for the larger community. So none of these groups exist in a vacuum. This is something that people have to understand about the left. None of these groups exist in a vacuum. They are decentrally organized from each other. So they're communicating with each other and they're not working against each other. And sometimes Students for Justice in Palestine will do one tactic. Sometimes Jewish Voice for Peace will do another tactic. Sometimes you have Oh, I don't know, the union of graduate students that Columbia student who got expelled was involved in. They'll do another tactic. So we have to understand the strategic role that these groups are playing in the protests. And then, of course, we have just several paragraphs on here is how you negotiate with them specifically. And this is what it looks like for the entire report. We have 30 different groups that we looked at. If not now, that's a Jewish progressive group. We've got Young Democratic Socialists of America, which of course is the college chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, Students for a Democratic Society. Jewish Voice for Peace was up there. The Palestinian Youth Movement is on there. Within Our Lifetime is on there. And these groups kind of go in order of how big, like big to small. Party for Socialism and Liberation is on there. The Answer Coalition is on there. So you can see this report covers all of them. The People's Forum tells you everything you need to know about them, breakthrough news, how they're all working together. And I really enjoyed writing it, and I really enjoyed putting it together. And I want to get this information out there as far as I can. So I've actually already been on the phone earlier today with trying to connect with different like Republican groups. I have people who are going to help me do that to go present this information. I want to get this information out there to communities, colleges, and universities, things like that. So if you have groups that you think might be interested in this information, please feel free to send them to the website. Again, that is decodetheleft.com/campus, where they can sign up to download the report. They can sign up for the webinar that's coming up, all that good stuff. And I'm really excited about this, and I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys find it interesting, and I hope we can get it out there. And it'll be interesting to see if there's any response to it, because I don't know of any other report like this that exists. Maybe if you guys know of something that I haven't seen, there could always be that. But I don't know of any other report about the groups involved in the campus protest specifically that's as comprehensive as this. And I'm really proud of this. And I think it's a great product, and I think it's going to help a lot of people out. So again, you can find that over on decodetheleft.com. That is decodetheleft/campus, and download the report and get in touch with me if you have any questions, and we'll have to help you out. Now, before we get into the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, can I just do a fun order of business? Well, maybe not fun. Maybe not fun. Perhaps not fun, but necessary. So this is a follow-up from yesterday. Yesterday, as you guys know, I called out, among many other people, Josh Slocum of the Disaffected Podcast, because Josh Slocum of the Disaffected Podcast was among many people who saw fit to use my dog's death to harass me. And the point that I made yesterday when I spoke directly to these people is, if you are going to weaponize the death of someone's pet to harass them on the internet, you are lower than scum, in my opinion. You are a vile piece of human garbage, and it is a garbage thing to do. And it hasn't been shocking to me that people who have been harassing me literally for years on the internet did this. It wasn't shocking to me. I completely expected them to do it. I knew they were going to do it. But it is telling, isn't it? So I think that most people who patronize my channel regularly are probably on my side on this one. If someone's pet dies, you don't mess around with that. You don't mess around with pets. You don't mess around with like that sort of thing. That is a pure thing that if you dislike someone on the internet, just keep your mouth shut when their pet dies. I promise you, there will come a day when Carrie Smith's dog dies. Her dog is going to die someday. I think the dog's name is Tiger, if I remember correctly. It's that dog that Carrie always carries around. I find Carrie Smith to be one of the most reprehensible human beings on this planet. I find her to be psychotic. I find her to be completely unhinged. I find her to be completely inauthentic. I think she probably has a personality disorder of some sort. But I'll tell you this. When Carrie's dog dies, I'm not going to say shit about it. I'm not going to talk about her. I'm not going to make fun of her. I'm not going to talk about the dog. I'm not going to make fun of her for being upset about the dog. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just not going to talk about it. Because there are some things that you just don't do. And if you cross the line of trying to use someone's dead pet to harass them, then you are a horrible, vile, evil person, and you've shown us all your true colors, and there's just nothing else that I have to say. There's no moral high ground in using someone's pet to try to harass them for kicks on the internet. So I called out yesterday many people. Josh Slocum was among those people. And I just want to show you guys what Josh's response was, because Josh's Twitter, and this is the first time I'm actually seeing this. Because I was writing an almost 70-page report. That was what my energy was actually focused on. Well, Josh Slocum was reeing and complaining about me on the internet. I was finishing up a 70-page report analyzing college protesters. Anyway, I thought it would be interesting to go back and see Josh Slocum's reaction, though, because you know what? If I said something stupid like that on the internet and then someone said, bro, you're harassing someone over a dead pet, maybe I might keep my mouth shut. Maybe I might be like, yeah, maybe I went too far. Maybe that was a really shitty thing to do. Maybe I would just try to let it blow over. But did Josh Slocum do that? No, of course he didn't. Of course he didn't. So here was his first response, and he had many responses because he's definitely not personality disordered. He said, I've kept my mouth shut about Karlyn Borysenko long enough. For years. First of all, there is no reality where Josh Slocum has kept his mouth shut about me for years. I've never even spoken to Josh Slocum, and Josh Slocum has diagnosed me with mental health problems all over the internet, and I'm not the only person he's ever done this to. Josh Slocum is a weak gay man that does not like strong women because he has mommy issues. And so every time he encounters a strong woman, he diagnoses them as a narcissist on the internet, and he's created a little cult of people that also have mommy issues, that also every time Josh Slocum says that's a cluster B personality, they just go with it because it feeds into the mommy issues that they have, and they're trying to work out their trauma on the internet for some reason. There is no reality where Josh Slocum has kept his mouth shut about me. I've documented this many times. So that's lie number one right off the bat. 1, Karlyn is deranged. Seriously mentally deranged. She is an obvious cluster B in my view and has strong psychopathic tendencies. Receipts, please. Receipts. Are there receipts, pinky swear, trust me, bro? Are there receipts that one of us made fun of someone's dead dog and one of us said, no, you're not going to do that shit to me, asshole? So I would like examples, please, that are not taken out of context, that are not twisted to mean the worst possible thing they could mean. I want concrete examples presented in context about how I am deranged, mentally deranged, an obvious cluster B, and has strong psychopathic tendencies. And by the way, just so everyone knows, Josh Slocum has no training in psychology at all. He is a former funeral director that just makes things up, because if Josh Slocum had any training in psychology at all, if he had any credential in psychology at all, if he was like a practicing psychologist, he'd lose his license for saying that. He's never spoken to me. He's providing no evidence. He's publicly diagnosing for the world, not because it does anyone any good, not because it's ethically responsible, but because he's a clout whore on the internet, and this is how he gets clout. 2, I have never done any of the things she has accused me of, and neither have other people she's targeted. Well, Josh, unlike you, I provided screenshots as evidence. I provided screenshots, bro, of you dragging my dead dog. And if you think I don't have evidence for everything that you guys have said about me, you can head over to survivingcarriesmith.substack.com and you can find over 1,000 screenshots there of the things you assholes have said about me. So you have no evidence, and I have mountains of evidence, because as anyone who actually watched my show knows, all I did was show his public posts. 3, I have watched her stalk, abuse, and lie about people that I know privately. She is abusive, manipulative, and wicked. Josh Slocum's definition of stalking is that someone else posted something about me on the internet. I looked at that thing and I commented on it. That's his definition of stalking. And if that's not his definition of stalking, again, receipts, please, Josh. Receipts, please, that I have stalked, abused, and lied about people, and I've been abusive and manipulative and wicked. Because their definition of stalking is they get to post whatever they want on the internet, and I just have to pretend I don't see it, and I'm not playing that fucking game. If you choose to listen to her, believe her, or associate with her, I wish you very good luck and pray that you see who she really is and pull yourself back. Well, everyone can be the judge of who they think is psychotic and who they don't think is psychotic, Josh. Nor will I knowingly associate with anyone who knowingly associates with her. If you do, and you choose to make that known to me, I will terminate any contact between you and me permanently. Smallest violin in the world playing just for you, bro. And of course, all of his friends amplified that, but I don't really care about them because they're not very smart anyway. I want to go back and look at Josh's timeline, though. I want to go back and look at his timeline. Let's see. Where did he post that? Okay, here it is. Here it is. Here it is, I think. He says, where did it go? I want to show you guys how many posts he's made since he posted that on the internet yesterday. Hang on. Where did that go? Okay, I think it was up. Hang on. You guys have got to see his feed. Why isn't this loading, Twitter? Come on. You guys have got to feed it. Okay. So he said, apparently that insane woman, Karlyn, is streaming about me right now. No matter what she does, I'm not giving her the D. Bro, I would never lower myself to even come and be in the same room as you, to be really effing clear. I'm being told by a friend I won't watch her. So Josh is now commenting on something he won't watch. That Karlyn is claiming that people, including me, wanted her dead. Well, that's actually true. Yep, that's true. That is absolutely true. Carrie Smith's friends openly talked about how they were going to harass me until I was dead. And that information got back to me. And if they don't believe me, they can try their luck, because that absolutely happened, and I have a witness of that happening. I think she's projecting her own desires. Yeah, no, Josh. I just want you to shut the fuck up. I don't care if you live or die, Josh. You mean nothing to me, except that I want you to shut the fuck up. Let's see. We're scrolling up his timeline now. He's like rage tweeting about cluster B, cluster B, cluster B. I think it lasted 20 minutes on the one I watched her. Doubtless the most satisfaction she's had. He's trying to tag everyone to get them to come after me. Oh, this is his thread that we read earlier. Borysenko is literally and truly the embodiment example of personality disorder not otherwise specified. Okay, so now I literally, according to these people, not only do I literally have every personality disorder in the DSM, I also have the unspecified ones. Does that seem reasonable to anyone else? A person with no psychological training is going to literally diagnose me with every personality disorder in the DSM? Okay. Yeah, bro. Yeah, okay. You can't just find one of the 4 cluster B's expression in her. She has them all. Well, that's funny, Josh. It's funny that you think that you know anything about me, since I can scroll down. I can just scroll down your feed right here, bro, and see you refuse to watch me. You refuse to listen to me. You've never had a conversation with me, and yet you think you're in a position to publicly diagnose me with not just one personality disorder, but all personality disorders. That's not how it works, Josh. That's not how it works. You don't get to not talk to someone, not listen to anything they have to say, not consider any evidence at all, provide no proof of anything you're saying, and then still say she has every personality disorder. Pinky swear, trust me, bro. Rational, smart people, Josh, are going to see through this. Just you've surrounded yourself with the retards of the internet, so they can't see through it because they're the retards of the internet. But rational, smart people see through your bullshit. We're just going to keep scrolling up on his timeline. Psycho Frank is there. He's taught Josh Slocum. These are episodes that Josh Slocum has done specifically about me. Yeah, reading articles from Psychology Today, Josh, does not actually make you a clinician. It does not give you a credential. He's still tweeting about me here. This stuff, this nonsense today from KB, for example, is the reason I do the show Disaffected. I grew up in a trailer park version of Mommy Dearest, and worse in some ways, I know Cluster B like I know my own face. So Josh is working out his mommy issues by publicly and unethically diagnosing people he doesn't like with personality disorders. I want you to know it too, so you can protect yourself. No, Josh, you're not helping anyone, bro. You're not helping anyone. What you're doing is you're keeping people in a trauma loop that is not allowing them to work through their issues, is not allowing them to work through their anger, is not allowing them to work through any trauma that they might have had. You are keeping them traumatized, you piece of shit grifter. Social media is full of personality disorders and behaviors. Most of it can be avoided and left to rot on its own. But some people are genuinely dangerous financially, emotionally, legally, and physically. Know the signs. It could save your life. Josh Slocum's mommy issues are literally going to save people's lives. Okay, please. Please. Oh, yeah, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. Yep, we're going to get to that. We're not done yet. Josh Slocum kept tweeting. Cluster B is no joke. It's affecting all of you. And then he said, she's trying to rattle me through her alt account. I just blocked her. So what I did on Josh Slocum's initial post, I posted a screenshot proving that Josh Slocum went after my dead dog. It was the receipts he said I didn't have. I posted the screenshot from my alt account knowing he was going to block it because he's a little needle dick man that can't handle the fucking truth. So predictably, Josh Slocum is pretending that there's just no evidence when there is evidence that he came after my dead dog. When she targets someone like you, block them immediately. Never engage with them. Never interact with them. Give them nothing. Hold the line. I haven't thought about Josh Slocum in like a year. And the only time I actually think about Josh Slocum is when he's running his disgusting, retarded mouth about things like this. The only reason I even thought about Josh Slocum yesterday is because he tried to use my dead dog to harass me. I haven't said shit about this guy in a long time because he doesn't matter. But he thinks he can come along and use my dead dog to harass me. And, oh no, he's the victim here. Karlyn's targeting me. Karlyn's targeting me. Never mind that I used her dead dog to try to harass her. She's targeting me. I'm the real victim here. Go fuck yourself. Here's another post about me. How many posts did Josh Slocum make about me last night? Almost like the little baby was triggered. Almost like he knew he got caught. I waited as long as I did to say anything publicly. Yeah, again, you've been running your mouth for years, asshole. Primarily because giving that kind of attention to an unstable person is to court trouble. But also because I've counseled several friends in private phone calls who have been targeted by her. What that means is they posted shit about me on the internet and I responded to them because that's what they mean by targeting. They do something, I respond to them, and then I'm targeting them because they're allowed to say and do whatever they want. And they were scared and in tears. I didn't want to do anything that might encourage her to direct more at them. I don't believe I've ever directly interacted with her, though maybe once years ago and forgot. No, that's exactly it, Josh. You've literally never directly interacted with me, except you've gone all over the internet and have literally done shows about how I have a personality disorder. So thanks for admitting that you're an unethical shitbag. But she did a deranged stream about me years ago, accusing me of targeting her. I'd already sussed her. I am literally on the thumbnail of one of Josh Slocum's videos. I did a deranged stream about him. That asshole literally put me on the thumbnail of one of his deranged videos. And I have this all documented on video, by the way. If you want to go back and find the video I did about Josh Slocum, you will see that I'm literally watching an episode he did where I am on the thumbnail of the fucking video. Nothing she says about me hurts me. Well, you've been tweeting an awful lot for not being hurt because I don't have any emotional investment in her. Well, evidence begs to differ, and I've always seen what she is. I don't really care if someone goes off at the mouth about me and makes a fool of herself. That's her business. Well, someone's making a fool of themselves, Josh, and I'm going to bet it's the person who chose to harass someone over a dead dog. But because I'm in the business of trying to help people recognize cluster B abuse, it seemed to me that I needed to draw a public line. My hope is that anyone who doesn't yet see her character for what it is will pay attention for their own well-being. But that's not all. See, he's tagging people to try to get them to share it. Then this is one of my followers. So now my followers are starting to respond to Josh Slocum. And instead of just responding to them directly, Josh has to take screenshots and respond to them because he's a big boy, okay? He is a big boy. And he can behave like an adult at all times. So this person says, what is your training in psychology again? Please remind us. Josh says, this is cluster B behavior. It's evasion, attempts at reputation destruction. It's just shut up. Don't engage with it. Never justify yourself to someone who does this. Move on. So the question was, since Josh Slocum is all over his timeline, diagnosing me with a serious personality disorder, someone says, hey, Josh, what is your training in psychology exactly? Josh Slocum's response to that is, you are a cluster B personality disorder narcissist if you ask him what his training in psychology is. Everyone understands what's going on here, right? Everyone gets this. If you can't answer a simple question about what is your training in psychology, perhaps you shouldn't be diagnosing people with serious personality disorders for clout on the internet. The next one. Oh, that's it. It's a personal issue. Yours. This type of behavior, this is the next step in narcissistic abuse. Mockery and minimization. Textbook behavior. So because this person didn't accept being called a cluster B narcissist because they asked Josh Slocum what his training was in psychology, that is proof that they're a narcissist, according to Josh Slocum. Okay. I trust your judgment. I strongly advise against doing that. The silver lining about situations online involving the personality disordered is the examples it gives from them and their enablers. It's not hard to learn the pattern and it saves you the headache. What point is he making exactly? What has he actually proven? No. I'm not watching any of his content. I'm not wasting my time like that. My time is too precious. I'm acknowledging this because this is directly about me. I'm not wasting my time with his bullshit. Oh, that was you, Kenneth? You know what, Kenneth? He probably thought you were me. He probably thought this was like what, because this is what they always say. They're like, Karlyn has all these accounts. And so they probably thought that you and I were the same person. Then he says, be sending out all her flying monkeys this evening. Got my red fly swatter out. And then Kenneth apparently responded, no one has to listen. The bigger question, why does a small coterie of vindictive losers spend years attacking her, even stooping to mock her after her dog dies? Who does this? Josh Slocum's very hinged into reality response, this is flying monkeyism. Note it, but refuse to engage with it. It's not very sophisticated. I could do better. So now you're all flying monkeys. Congratulations. Yeah, you got told you were my alt account too. Yeah, they think that everyone is me, apparently. They're way paranoid about it. Then he said, this is what a cult member would say. And Josh tweeted that and said, projection and reversal, the narcissist's most valuable tool. The first one they reach for. It's just, nah, you are. They simply disgorge their own motivations by attributing them to you. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Isn't Josh the one that's like tagging everyone and trying to send everyone to attack me and they can't because I blocked them all years ago? Still talking about cluster Bs. It's really simple to understand cluster Bs. They're liars, the essential liars. They lie about everything all the time. They often believe themselves, but they lie. When you understand that some people are just this way, the confusion goes away. It's simple. They're trying to say that that's me. And he just keeps going and going and going. A lot of people are cluster B noticers. This is what he does all day, every day. I don't know how a person tweets this much. I really don't. I know there are times in my life when I tweeted a lot, but anyway, that is your so-called expert in personality disorders. And I'm not going to tell anyone what to do. You can listen to whoever you want. But if you take his advice on really any topic at all, I wish you the very best of luck. All right, guys, that is the end of my little aside. Thank you for sticking with me. We are going to get into the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club now. I know, I ranted for an hour. It happens. It's my show. I'll do what I want. All right. So we are going to get into the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club now. As a reminder, if you would like to support the work I'm doing and keep me in business because I am 100% funded by you, you can head over to my Substack. That is Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Sign up for a membership of $8 a month, $80 a year. We have got a huge spy stream coming up next week. Huge, multi-day, epic, insane, far leftist social justice warrior. I cannot emphasize enough. Some people in my group chat know what the spy stream is. And I don't want anyone to give the big reveal away because we have to keep it a secret. We don't want to get found out, okay? But if people that know what it is can just comment on how fucking good this spy stream is, this is a massively large multi-day event that we are going to be infiltrating next week. That is, I'm so excited because the insanity level is going to be off the chart. And I bring this up because SpyStream is a member-only supporter exclusive, okay? So if you've been waiting for a reason to support my work, sign up on the Substack now. We're going to be doing a membership drive. I need to get my membership numbers up to a certain amount. We're going to be doing a lot of member-only content until we get there. It's going to be amazing. You guys are going to see leftist and craziness and insanity like you've never seen it before. So make sure you head over, sign up for $8 a month, $80 a year, and get access to SpyStream next week and support the work I'm doing. And I really, really appreciate it. We are going to be getting into Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, reading a text called Queering Anarchism. And we're just going to jump right in. We are working on, I guess I have to update this. Hang on. We are working on Police at the Border. That is the next section we're going to be reading. We're going to be reading probably a couple essays out of it today. I'm just waiting for it to load on my thing. Guys, please mount the like button if you would be so kind. Please make sure you are subscribed to the channel if you're not already. There we go. There we go. Let's get our handy dandy Counter-Revolutionary Book Club logo up in the corner. If you have questions as we are making our way through this document, please do feel free to ask them in the chat. If you have observations about what this document says, please feel free to put them in the chat. I want to create as much of a book club experience as I can. We are all reading this document together. It does not matter if you are a beginner or you've been around a long time. We will help break this down for you. You can see what the far left is really talking about when they think people like us aren't listening. So we're going to start first with today an essay called Police at the Border, and this is on page 27 of Queering Anarchism. Let's get this party started.
Police at the Borders. Abbey Volcano Anarchism as a social movement, as an idea, as a practice, is as much about creation as it is about destruction. Mikhail Bakunin wrote, "The passion for destruction is a creative passion too." Further, anarchism isn't solely centered on crushing structures like capitalism and—
Hang on. I want to reload that. Sorry about that. I was messing around to make the video a little bit better, but I messed it up. So let me just reload. My B. I was trying to make things better and I made them worse. I was trying to do everyone a solid by making it a little bit bigger so people could see it. Okay, let's see if this works. Take two.
Police at the Borders. Abbey Volcano Anarchism as a social movement, as an idea, as a practice, is as much about creation as it is about destruction. Mikhail Bakunin wrote, "The passion for destruction is a creative passion too." Further, anarchism isn't solely centered on crushing structures like capitalism and the state. Rather, we seek to smash all institutionalized hierarchies.
Oh!
We reject all forms of—
Hang on, that was an important part and I was messing around again with the settings. My bad. I'm trying to be fancy here. Okay, so what it says is, anarchism isn't solely centered on crushing structures like capitalism and the state, although we anarchists certainly want that. Rather, we seek to smash all institutionalized hierarchies. Now, this might seem a bit pedantic, but without capitalism, you don't get institutional hierarchies. Without institutional hierarchies, you don't have capitalism. You need one to create the other in their worldview, but I think it's interesting that they delineated like that because ultimately the goal of equity is to eliminate all hierarchies. Anytime you have a category, you have a hierarchy.
Rather, we seek to smash all institutionalized hierarchies. We reject all forms of coerced domination. But imagine if capitalism, the state, white supremacy, patriarchy, etc., were removed. What would remain?
All that means
Unfortunately,
capitalism.
not much one could imagine. Anarchists, then, might also be creative. We might try to create new ways of relating to each other, new ways of relating to the non-human world, new ways of loving, knowing, playing, etc. If we don't create these new social relations, then we will likely fall back on the current ones, at worst, and will not realize our creative potential, at best. Anarchists are often creating new ways of living and relating in the here and now. This chapter gives some thought on how we might do the same with sexuality, while not recreating the coercive social relations that confine us now. An anarchist queer theory might also begin by attempting to tear down the borders between identities, by showing that people are complex and are not easily categorized.
Okay, I just want to pause there because I wish it was highlighting this. Maybe I'll just do that. So this is important because a lot of people think that the left is all about identity politics. That's trickled down from the far left. So who engages in identity politics are Democrats and liberals, sometimes progressives. But when you get over to the real far left, it's actually the opposite of identity politics. They want to eliminate all categories. They don't want the categories to define anything. They want to eliminate the categories altogether. Right now, they have to highlight the categories because it is the existence of the categories that creates oppression in the first place. categorize. And when they're doing things like progressive stack, or they're doing things like Black Lives Matter, they're trying to what they're saying is essentially the categories have created this massive oppression, so we have to acknowledge the categories exist to be able to disproportionately favor this group on the bottom so we can start to level the hierarchy. However, the ultimate goal is not to have Black people ahead of white people or women above men. The ultimate goal is the elimination of categories altogether. That's the difference that people need to understand.
An anarchist queer theory might also begin by attempting to tear down the borders between identities, by showing that people are complex and are not easily categorized, at least not honestly. This means tearing down the normative assumptions that are used to uphold a status quo that puts some of us above others in the social order as a result of our sexual and/or gender practices.
See, that's what I just said.
This is neatly described by the term heteronormativity, which refers to the culture of understanding and the institutionalization of heterosexual, cissexual, dyadic, monogamous, and permanent relationships as the only possible and coherent sexuality.
Okay, so now we've got the definition of heteronormativity, which is important because this word comes up all the time. Heteronormativity for them is it refers to the culture of understanding and the institutionalization of heterosexual, cissexual, dyadic, monogamous, that's important, and permanent relationships as the only possible and coherent sexuality. So when they're referring to this, they're not necessarily referring to just straight couples. And I hope people understand that. Straight for them does not mean a man and a woman. Straight for them means normal, as in norms that uphold capitalism, as in norms that uphold the normative nuclear family. And that is what they're against, because they don't like it when gay people get married either. We covered this in the previous part of the podcast. We know they don't like it when gay people get married. We've seen this show up in other places. It's called homonormativity. It puts them in a monogamous propertied relationship with another person, which they believe is the same thing basically as being heterosexual. So you have to remember that they're using a different definition for the term than what you have. Even if it seems like they're using the same one, they're really not.
Sometimes, rather than destabilizing the hierarchically organized and institutionalized borders of heteronormativity, folks will construct new, queer, normative assumptions to replace our current organized, normative structures of sexuality. This is a process of inverting hierarchies instead of doing away with them. Instead of recognizing that hierarchically organized sexuality was our problem in the first place.
Hang on. Don't do this. For people who might be listening to the podcast, Warhammer, and I'm not trying to make you feel bad for doing this. I understand why you did this, says, oh no, they're eliminating the categories of adult and minor. No. No one said that. The reason you think that is the conservative narrative. That is what we call a conservative bullshit talking point. Because you are not going to see that reflected in this document. I promise you. Now, that's not to say that they don't have ideas about children being but adults in little bodies. They're a little bit like Scientologists in that regard. However, I want to be very, 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 very clear about this. You are not going to see stuff in this entire essay collection about the sexualization of children, because that's not what this is. I'm not suggesting the sexualization of children doesn't happen. I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm saying it is a completely separate problem from this. And every single time people conflate it, you are actually missing the real problem. So we have got to stop conflating it. People like, and this is an example, and I'm just giving you this as guidance. Again, I'm really not trying to make you feel bad. What I will say is you have to stop making shit up. You didn't see anything about adult and minor in this. We've talked about the elimination of categories of male and female. That is something they actually do want. So you were right about that. But then what you did, and I'm again just telling you this for your own awareness and maybe for the awareness of other people, then what you did is you added on an extra thing that no one said. That's the part where you started making shit up. We have to deal in the evidence that's right in front of us. And every time we're bringing in talking points from other places, that is not respecting the evidence right in front of us. Okay. So again, not trying to make you feel bad. I appreciate you being here and listening and all that stuff.
Instead of recognizing that hierarchically organized sexuality was our problem in the first place, we often flip the current normative expectations on their heads and create a twisted mirror image of the current institutionalized sexuality by hierarchically ordering a new queer sexuality. This might look like privileging non-monogamy, genderqueerness, and BDSM, for example, over other types of sexuality and gender.
So they just said it right there. When they're saying so the opposite of heterosexuality for them is going to be non-monogamy, genderqueerness, and BDSM. So gay people can be in monogamous relationships that they're not genderqueer and they're not doing BDSM. That is still going to be an example in this framework of a heteronormative relationship. They call it homonormative, but it's basically the same thing. Okay. So this is what they mean. When they're queering relationships, they are privileging non-monogamy, genderqueer, and BDSM because that is what goes against normativity.
Instead of creating a world in which sexuality is somewhat liberated, we instead create new borders and see Mikhail Bakunin,
Oh, no.
The Reaction in
Hang
Germany.
on. That is a
fragment
citation. Sorry. Oh, shoot.
Behaviors.
Hang on.
Sometimes
I just clicked the wrong thing. Okay, so instead of creating a world in which sexuality is somewhat liberated, we instead create new borders and
behaviors.
No,
Sometimes
that's not what I
in our
clicked on.
struggle.
That's literally not what I clicked on. I don't know why you're making me go down a whole page.
Behaviors.
Seriously, why is it making me go down a page? I apologize, guys. You guys see me clicking on this, right? Hang on. I'm literally clicking on this.
Behaviors.
And it skips right over it. Do I have to go from here? We're going to try one more thing and then I'm going to read it.
Additionally, homonormativity is a term describing the...
It's not going to work. Okay, so I guess I have to read this page then. Fine. Instead of creating a world in which sexuality is somewhat liberated, we instead create new borders and new limitations around sexuality. We have simply inverted the hierarchy and exclude those deemed not queer enough. Okay, so they're saying so what they're saying is that if they're putting like things like genderqueerness and BDSM on top, they're just inverting the hierarchy. Think of how many times you've sat around with a group of well-meaning folks and the conversation has gone something like this. As a working class person, I have to say, a few nods of agreement. As a poor woman, it seems to me, even more nods. As a poor lesbian of color, I think, even more furious nodding, making sure everyone registers each other's frenetic agreement. So I don't have conversations like that. I think that's a very leftist thing, but I understand why they are saying that. And so on.
Behaviors.
No, it's still not doing it. Not on that whole page. Weird. These kinds of displays are often referred to as the oppression Olympics. People in these situations, wow. They're making fun of Democrats who do this. The queers are making fun of the Democrats and the liberals for engaging in the oppression Olympics. That's hilarious. These kinds of displays are often referred to as the oppression Olympics. People in these situations seem like they're playing a game together, a grand contest to assert who is more authentic and more oppressed and thus more correct. It's at this point where identity becomes fetishized, where essential understandings of people trump good sense, and where patronizing belief in the superiority of the wise, noble savage often overrides any sense at all. Often this tactic of agreeing with the most marginalized in the room will be used as a substitute for developing critical analysis, that means Marxism, around race, gender, and sexuality. The tactic is intellectually lazy and lacks political depth and often leads to tokenization. Wow. That's insane. They are actually more critical of Democrats and liberals for playing the oppression Olympics game than I think conservatives are. There is a point to allowing our experiences of various forcefully assigned identities to be at the forefront of conversation. People do have different experiences based on these social constructions. So they think that all identities are socially constructed. They're saying it here. People do have different experiences based on these social constructions, and we should take these differences into account. But when they become markers of authenticity and quote correctness, it poses a problem for anarchists. After all, we seek to dissolve hierarchical relations, not create new ones formed from the margins. Again, they're saying our goal is not to engage in identity politics. We're making fun of that. We're calling it the oppression Olympics. Our goal is to eliminate all categories altogether. Queer theory has taken up the discerning task of putting identity, and by extension, identity politics, under a destabilizing lens. Ooh. An anarchist queer theory might give us more effective ways of relating to the oppression Olympics, a set of games no one really wins anyway. And in an anarchist politic of sexuality and gender, this means that care needs to be taken not to invert existing hierarchies, much like the oppression Olympics do, making more authentic voices out of some over others and creating new hierarchies to replace old ones. With this piece, then, I want to briefly talk about a few ways that I think radical queer politics and spaces have often come to invert existing hierarchies rather than doing away with them or perhaps destabilizing them. I want to make it clear that this isn't an argument for a return to heteronormativity, nor is it an argument for an end to celebrating our queerness and the things that we desire. Rather, it is an argument that the way we fuck, love, and gender ourselves are not inherently revolutionary. By creating a politics that refuses the hierarchical arrangement of people because of their sexual and or gender practices, and importantly, one that does not pressure people into certain practices under the auspices of being more authentically queer, does indeed have radical implications. And then the header says, aren't we all very public sluts? We're almost done of me reading. I know everyone's excited. In the next 3 sections, I'm going to outline a few practices from within the radical queer circles that I would like to critique and that I think we can learn from. Like I noted before, this is tricky and complicated. While most radical queers I know or know of are working on dismantling structures that reproduce, social reproduction theory, reproduce normative assumptions about sexual identities or expected
behaviors. Sometimes in our struggles we can inadvertently reinscribe these norms and then organize underneath them. For instance, promiscuity and public sex are for the most part frowned upon in the United States. Sexuality is to be experienced in private monogamous relationship. Public displays of affection are okay in the United States as long as they are heterosexual and PG-13.
Hang on. Warhammer, you should know this. You should know this already, but that's okay because everyone learns at their own pace. I find it interesting that they want to destroy categories that many millions of years old and basis of evolution. They believe that capitalism started in ancient Sumeria. They believe the only way to abolish capitalism is to abolish everything. We covered this in Against the Gendered Nightmare.
Throw some similarly gendered sexed love in there and bring the rating up to R, and you might get the cops called on you. There are examples of private nightclubs getting raided and folks getting arrested for risky sexual activity. We have laws in the United States against sodomy, BDSM, and other forms of non-normative sexual activity. Folks who have desires that have been either literally outlawed and or disapproved of culturally find themselves in a position of transgressing sexual norms when they practice their sexual desires. Challenging our own desires is an important step in trying to shed the institutionalized, directed, compulsory, organized, and controlled sexualities that have been made available to us. However, one can challenge institutionalized sexual categories and expressions without necessarily having to swing the pendulum to the opposite side with their own sexual practices or with their expectation for others' sexual practices. For instance, just because promiscuity is a non-normative sexual desire practice doesn't mean that to be in the act of challenging such norms that one must participate in promiscuity, per se. For instance, I can reject and struggle against the sexual gender status quo without the need to physically embody practice certain non-normative sexualities. Sexual acts themselves are
Okay, so what this person is saying is actually kind of important. So they're saying, listen, we can acknowledge that certain sexual practices are socially constructed via capitalism and that they're forced on society for people against their will. But that doesn't mean that you are not what they're saying is just because these are socially constructed things that are kind of forced on you by capitalism, that doesn't mean you're required to do the opposite of those things. So you're not required to engage in BDSM. You're not required to engage in sex work. You're not required to engage in promiscuity. You're not required to be in a polyamorous relationship. They're saying we're not going to force you to do any of these things. We just want you to acknowledge that the values and beliefs that you have were socially constructed for you based on the capitalist system that you're in. So people think that like queering relationships means that they're going to force you to be in a certain kind of relationship. They're actually saying the opposite. They're just saying that we're not going to force you to do anything, but there's a reason that you want to be in a certain kind of relationship. That is I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm explaining the argument.
Sexual acts themselves are not what we are challenging as queer radicals. We are struggling against sexualities and sexual acts being categorized and ordered into hierarchical systems that privilege certain practices' desires over others.
So that's beautiful the way they just said it. So they're saying, we don't care how you have sex. You could have vanilla monogamous sex if you want, heterosexual sex, whatever. You could do the missionary position with the lights off under the blanket with the shades drawn and all that stuff. They're saying that doesn't matter. We are struggling against sexualities and sexual acts being categorized and ordered into a hierarchical system that privilege certain practices and desires over others. It's not about the sexual acts, it's about the categories and the hierarchy.
On occasion, I have seen the tendency for radical queers to assume that most radical queers have some particular non-normative sexual desire practice. Having witnessed this fairly often, I don't believe that folks intend to make these assumptions. What's peculiar about normative assumptions around sexuality and gender is their ability to be invisible. This is why we also need to struggle at the conceptual level. We need to not only smash the seemingly automatic jump to create and maintain status quos, but we also need to replace the notion of status quo with something else. Perhaps an awareness of the very non-necessity of status quos governing consensual sexual practices, and a very conscious understanding of the damage and limitations that these kinds of understandings can create and maintain. I'm personally a rather shy and private person, and at times I have felt pressured to be promiscuous and experiment with non-normative sexual play, often by friends of mine. At times, folks will assume that of course I want to make out with my radical queer friends, of course I want to go to the play party, and of course I wouldn't have an exclusive relationship with only one other person. These assumptions can be cleared up rather easily with an honest conversation. However, the expectation to live up to new queer norms is extremely problematic for a struggle that started off as challenging the very existence of those kinds of assumptions and limitations in the first place. These are oftentimes easy and expected mistakes to make while we struggle. It seems so ingrained in us to conceive of the correct line or correct path that it's hard to deviate from that if we're not paying very close attention and employing a great deal of self and collective reflexivity. The essentialist and egregious dynamic of the oppression Olympics act.
Okay, so we got a question from Warhammer. I understand sexual categories, but what is the hierarchy in sexuality? Anytime you have a category, there is a hierarchy. So in this case, what they're going to say is there is a hierarchy in which the vanilla, monogamous, non-queer, heterosexual relationship is at the top of the hierarchy, and the queer, polyamorous, I don't know, open relationship where they're engaging in BDSM and all sorts of crazy kinky stuff, that's on the bottom of the hierarchy. Anytime you have categories, you have a hierarchy. The hierarchy is what the norm is. The oppressor is what the norm is. The oppressed is what is non-normative, because queer is about pushing back against normativity. So if you have questions about like what is the hierarchy, think, what do most people do? What most people do is going to be on the top, and is usually going to be the opposite of what queer people do.
The essentialist and egregious dynamic of the oppression Olympics actually seems to require a correct line as it attempts to quantify, isolate, and hierarchically order different forms and experiences of multiple and overlapping oppressions. It's important to make sure that while we struggle, we do our best to not recreate what we are struggling against. Inverted hierarchies are no better than the original hierarchies. It's understandable that a common reaction to expected sexual norms is to find potential value and liberation in doing the opposite. We've all reacted that way, to a degree, to systems of hierarchy at some point in our life. But understanding that this type of reaction is exactly that, a reaction, is important. Instead of reacting by doing the opposite, we need ways to move forward that don't resemble our original chains, even if they are fastened backwards. A systemic vision of the way sexuality, sex, and gender are hierarchically ordered and organized is more fruitful than a reaction that is typified by doing the opposite of whatever feels constraining. For those interested, Nietzsche wrote extensively on this subject, which he termed ressentiment.
Oh, Nietzsche.
Not only are we still setting limits and creating new hierarchical sexual expectations when we define a liberated sexuality as one that is the direct opposite of the current socially acceptable and viable sexuality, but we are also continuing to define this liberated sexuality by that which caged us in the first place. If the opposite is liberating, then we are still being defined and limited by the original form, since its opposite is defined by itself. A large part of the radical queer project is rooted in the struggle against the creation and maintenance of the normal that is used to discipline all of us and our desires. Will the real queer please stand up? In this section, I'd like to develop
I'm starting to wonder if, I always forget if his name is David or Derek, Halprin. Did he actually define what queer was? Hang on, I'm just going to look this up. Was Halprin the original definition of queer? I don't think so, because that doesn't make sense. That was like in the 90s, right, or something? Well, I mean, queer. I should have been more. I should have been more specific. I meant queer as something that is non-normative. Who first defined queer as non-normative? The idea that queer, I'm reading this from ChatGPT, from my ChatGPT, which has a lot of crazy shit loaded into it. The idea of queer as non-normative was first formalized in academic queer theory, particularly in the early 90s. The most influential figure in this redefinition was Eve Kozovsky Sedgwick, who I've never heard of, along with the scholars Judith Butler and Michael Warner. Eve, her name is Kosofsky. Sedgwick wrote The Epistemology of the Closet. Sedgwick helped lay the foundation of queer theory by arguing that sexuality is not a fixed identity, but a fluid, unstable, socially constructed spectrum. She was among the first to suggest that queer could represent a challenge to all forms of normativity, not just heterosexuality. Judith Butler defined queer as non-normative in her book Gender Trouble. This is what gender performativity is. Michael Warner, Fear of a Queer Planet in 1993. Warner explicitly framed queers. I wonder if this was in response to ACT UP. Does anyone know? This is something we should look into. Were all these people involved in the ACT UP movement in some way? I bet you they were. I am convinced that Judith Butler came out of this subculture in San Francisco because she teaches at Berkeley, right? I am convinced that she came out of this subculture and that's where all her ideas came from. I'm convinced that I'm convinced that someday we are going to find a picture of Judith Butler at like a queer punk show in the 80s. Let's see. So when did Halprin offer his definition? No. What is his name? David Halprin or Derek? Something like that. $1995. So okay, so Halprin's definition was in 1995. So he was not the first. How interesting. Okay, continuing. Sorry for that aside, but
In this section, I'd like to develop the case for queer as a position with a context rather than a stable or fixed identity. One thing this means is defining in queer heterosexualities, to name perhaps one controversial example. A good question to bring this point home might be, who is more oppressed, erased, and marginalized as a result of their sexuality, an upper-class white gay man living in the Castro or a poor, working-class heterosexual woman of color living in the Bible Belt who has a number of heterosexual relationships, is promiscuous, and is open about it and proud of it? Here we can imagine a heterosexual relationship perhaps being more marginalized in this context as compared to the non-heterosexual relationship that this scenario offers. This question doesn't have an answer. There are a multitude of specific contexts that would affect both of these.
Okay, so this is actually interesting because they're using it, and I think this book was written in like 2012 or something. So what they're saying is, and this is, if conservatives ever bother to actually read this stuff, their minds would be blown, I promise you. This is like the argument that conservatives always make, right? It's like, you're telling me that rich black people are more oppressed than poor white people. That's going to be your conservative argument to the idea of white privilege, right? So what they're saying is, and people ask this all the time, they're like, Karlyn, when the queers win, does that mean that queer becomes normative? And I try to explain to them, no, because it's a positional definition. But look at this. They're saying, who's actually more oppressed? Is the rich gay man that lives in the rich gay district in San Francisco oppressed? Or is the poor working class straight black woman who sleeps around a lot, is she more oppressed? They're actually kind of taking the argument. They're saying like, is it the gay person who's actually more oppressed, or is it the poor black straight woman who sleeps around a lot that's more oppressed? And then because the argument is actually that they're both oppressed because the categories are what's oppressive. But they're basically saying, like, you could technically not be like the typical, what they would call queer. You could be straight. You could be heterosexual. Well, I guess those are the same thing. You could be, they're basically saying, like, you could be a straight white man, but, like, do things a little bit differently. Maybe you're poor. Maybe you sleep around a lot. Or maybe, like, I guess a woman would be a better example in this case. But they're saying, like, you don't have to be what would stereotypically be considered queer to be oppressed, because it is the categories that make them oppressive, I think. I have to think through a little bit how I'm explaining that. It makes sense in my head. I don't know if it makes sense coming out of my mouth.
This question doesn't have an answer. There are a multitude of specific contexts that would affect both of these hypothetical relationships. What this question should do, however, is make obvious that heterosexual relationships aren't always more acceptable or viable than non-heterosexual relationships. It may very well be that a non-heterosexual relationship that mirrors a normative heterosexual relationship may cause less trouble than a heterosexual relationship that involves non-normative sexual acts or manifestations of love that involve more than two people. I am not suggesting that other overlapping positions in society don't affect these scenarios. Of course they do. In fact, the intersections of race, class, gender, sexuality, nation of origin, location, culture, etc. will all affect whether someone's style of loving is to be viewed as normative and acceptable or otherwise. This very fact highlights the point that the gender specificity of a relationship isn't always the axis of acceptance or not. We can see that there are very real ways that heterosexual relationships or styles of loving can very much stand in opposition to the normal, whereas non-heterosexual relationships and ways of loving can very much mirror the normal and may not subsequently be scrutinized nor understood as abnormal. It makes sense then to develop queer as a relational term vis-a-vis the normal rather than an identity marker that's just short for LGBT.
Oh, they're flat out saying it. They just said it. Being queer is not about being LGBT. Being queer is about a relationship term that is positionally defined based on what normal is. You guys catch that?
It makes sense then to develop queer as a relational term vis-a-vis the normal rather than an identity marker that's just short for LGBT. I have always found it interesting to explore why some practices
Sedgwick,
have
we just talked about
historically
this
come
person.
to constitute an identity, while others have not. As Sedgwick writes, it is a rather amazing fact that, of the very many dimensions along which the genital activity of one person can be differentiated from that of another, precisely one.
Okay, so there's a whole bunch. So the AI reader, unfortunately, is not reading stuff in parentheses. Normally that's not a problem, but there's a lot of stuff in parentheses here, so I just want to read this quote myself. And it's from Sedgwick, who we just learned is maybe the originator of the definition of queer being non-normative. It is a rather amazing fact that of the many dimensions along with the genital activity of one person can be differentiated from that of another, dimensions that include preferences for certain acts, certain zones of sensation, certain physical types, a certain frequency, certain symbolic investments, certain relationships or relations of age and power, a certain species, a certain number of participants, and so on. Precisely one, the gender of the object choice emerged from the turn of the century and has remained as the dimension denoted by the now ubiquitous category of sexual orientation. Oh, that's actually kind of an interesting thing. So they're saying, isn't it crazy that the thing that became the most important about sex is the gender of the person that you're having it with and not any other of these categories that might be related to sex, like the things you like or the ages that you like or if you're kinky or not or any of those other things. It became all about the gender of the other person, and you have to remember that they think that gender is a socially constructed category, so they're like, the made up thing became the definer of all sexuality ever. That's okay. So I don't believe that gender is like socially constructed, so I don't agree with them on that, but it's kind of an interesting perspective, isn't it, to say, why did this become the all-encompassing thing? Why did the gender of the person you're stooping become the all-encompassing thing when all of these other relevant categories are just as important, probably? That, I don't know. It's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it like that.
In queer theory, the very idea of the queer is a shifting terrain that cannot be pinned down to some single definition. Rather, queer can be understood as what is at odds with the normal or legitimate.
That's
This
Halprin.
being the case, there is nothing in particular to which queer necessarily refers, which makes queer an identity without an essence. In this way, as demonstrated above, we can look for hierarchies within heterosexual relationships or ways of loving. A heterosexual relationship of two cisgendered and monogamous people who keep their sexuality indoors is quite different from heterosexual ways of doing relationships that involve non-monogamy, public BDSM, or selling sex for money. I did a small survey at Syracuse University in the fall of 2010 and found that the overwhelming majority of students interviewed believed it was fine that children were raised by two people of the same sex if they were in one monogamous relationship. However, at the same time they also believed that children have no place in the home of someone who is heterosexual but has more than one relationship or is involved in a relationship that consists of more than two people. In this case, the genders within a relationship weren't a factor for judging acceptable environments for children to be raised in, but the type of relationship was a factor. Same-sex relationships were fine, as well as heterosexual relationships, but only if they were otherwise normative. Both same-sex or heterosexual relationships that were non-normative, in this case involving either more than one partner or more than one relationship, were not deemed appropriate for raising children. Obviously, with this scenario, we can see how non-gender-specific ways of loving were the problem for those interviewed, not the gender involved. Pressured to poly? I'd like to focus this section on some personal experiences I've had in which queer, in part, has become synonymous with non-monogamous.
Okay, so I just want to so for anyone who's new, polyamory is one of the ways that queer anarchists and queer Marxists want to queer the nuclear monogamous family, because it just essentially means having a relationship with more than one person. If you're raising kids in that environment, kids have more than one parent. It's queering the idea of monogamy as a form of property relations, which they think that's what marriage is. That's why they oppose gay marriage. I just want to point out, though, that not every polyamorous person is a leftist. Not every polyamorous person is a queer Marxist. It's not a guarantee. And I say that because I know polyamorous people that are actually shockingly conservative, and they're not queer at all. So I want to make sure people understand that just because someone is polyamorous doesn't make them queer. However, a queer person has a much higher degree of likelihood of being polyamorous because they are doing polyamory as a political act. They're doing it as a political statement and an acknowledgement of their queer identity. But normal, non-queer polyamorous people are not doing it for that reason. They're doing it for a different reason, and we need to acknowledge that.
I'd like to focus this section on some personal experiences I've had in which queer, in part, has become synonymous with non-monogamous. I've seen people get pressured to be sexually active in queer communities in ways that we'd immediately label as coercive outside of them. Even more absurd, I've seen monogamous same-sex attracted folks defined out of queer by polyheterosexuals for being too normal or being homonormative. Again, this understanding forces sexuality into something we are instead of something we do, and is a retreat from a radical queer sensibility into policing the borders of identity and practice. After all, we're anarchists because we want to get rid of cops, not be them. Further, this policing of the borders of identity and practice creates a troubling outside and against attitude toward the more mainstream LGBT community. Of course, not everyone in the more mainstream LGBT community are our comrades, but a lot of them could be. This doesn't mean we shouldn't challenge the LGBT community on concepts such as compulsory monogamy, homonormativity, racism in the movement, an uncritical fight for gay marriage, or the problematic struggles for hate crime legislation and for the inclusion of gays in the military and what have you. What it does mean is that we shouldn't be positioning the mainstream LGBT community as the bad guys and turning our collective nose up at anyone who chooses to use identity labels such as lesbian. I've witnessed queer people.
So the fact that this even had to be written tells you that was what was happening. This is like a response. This is a response to queer Marxists in the 2000s, basically shitting on people if they were just normal lesbian and gay people. Because remember, again, queer Marxists were not in favor of gay marriage, and so they were probably there was a schism that happened between the normal gays that literally just wanted to be able to get married so they could visit their loved ones in the hospital, and the queer Marxists who did not want anyone to get married at all because marriage is a form of property relations. And so that the queer Marxists were just shitting on the normal gay people, and this essay is like a response saying we shouldn't be shitting on the normal gay people just because they don't want to be polyamorous, okay? Which is kind of funny.
What it does mean is that we shouldn't be positioning the mainstream LGBT community as the bad guys and turning our collective nose up at anyone who chooses to use identity labels such as lesbian. I've witnessed queer people exclaim that anyone using the identity of lesbian is oppressive. This is ridiculous and brings us back to my earlier discussion of ressentiment. Towards a queerer conclusion. Queer, by definition, is an ongoing and never-ending process, so this piece certainly isn't intended to be the last word
Okay.
on queer thought or practice. Also, while I'm at it, I should mention that I'm not trying to suggest that we shouldn't be public sluts, polyamorous, etc. And for all of us, especially those of us who spend a good deal of time in a comfortable circle of queer friends, we need to remember that the dominant society still pressures us to not be publicly queer, and to fit into a heterosexual, monogamous, and cisgender standard that is stultifying, confining, and, well, boring.
So I just want to point out there's a footnote on the bottom of the page because it's not going to read it out loud. Homonormative refers to the same sex relationships that are dyadic, monogamous, permanent, or otherwise mirroring heteronormative relationships. So they gave us a really specific definition of the term homonormative, which basically means gay people that do everything the straight people do.
As we build movements, an insular, subcultural inwardness is anathema to creating broad-based mass movements, which are necessary if we're ever going to topple capitalism, the state, and other related evils. This will require ever queerer conclusions, as it is a process that likely has no definite end.
Okay, that's the end of that essay. That had nothing to do with the police. That essay was completely mistitled, but that's okay. Let's continue on and do another one. We are moving into the essay Gender Sabotage.
Gender Sabotage. Stacy, aka Solidarity. Look how your children grow up. Taught from their earliest infancy to curb their love natures, restrained at every turn. Little girls must not be tomboyish, must not go barefoot, must not climb trees, must not learn to swim. Little boys are laughed at as effeminate, silly girl boys if they want to make patchwork or play with a doll. Then when they grow up, oh, men don't care for home or children as women do. Why should they, when the deliberate effort of your life has been to crush that nature out of them? Women can't rough it like men. Train any animal or any plant as you train your girls, and it won't be able to rough it either. Now will somebody tell me why either sex should hold a corner on athletic sports? Why any child should not have free use of its limbs? These are the effects of your purity standard, your marriage law. This is your work, look at it. Voltairine de Clear, Sex Slavery. What?
Social media comment section asked in the chat, did you guys talk about the Florida shooter yet? No, I haven't. I saw that happened. I just didn't really look that much into it. So if you guys have anything you would like to share about that, please feel free to do so in the chat.
What makes me transgendered is that my birth sex, which is female, appears to be in social contradiction to my gender expression, which is read as masculine. I defend my right to that social contradiction. In fact, I want to live long enough to hear people ask, what made me think that was a contradiction in the first place? Leslie Feinberg, Trans Liberation. Anarcho-feminists and anarchists in general need to have some new discussions about gender. Feminism has had an ongoing internal argument regarding minimizing or maximizing the meanings of the differences between men and women. Now we are seeing the influence on many anarchists and feminists of newer ideas about gender that question the idea of a concrete concept of woman and man, even male and female. Yet some radical or anarchist feminists and lesbians remain stubborn about questioning the usefulness of a category called woman. Meanwhile, identity politics have come under fire in anarchist circles, often characterizing identity-oriented projects as homogeneous, and dismissing the importance of focusing on opposition to gender, sexuality, class, or racial oppressions. Yet that which is called identity politics often does involve essentialism, the idea that there are essential differences between two groups. In the case of feminism, Those who most often get to speak for the movement are white with class privilege and regularly marginalize the experiences of women of color and poor women, and exclude transgender transsexual people when they organize around a universal concept of women. The standard radical feminist characterization of the way gender oppression works legitimizes women's exercise of domination and makes men's domination seem natural and inevitable.
Okay, so apparently the shooter in Florida was a part of Students for a Democratic Society. That is one of the groups that I profiled in my new report called The Campus Insurrection because they were intimately involved with that. And he's a total communist. Oh, great. Oh, great. You mean the communists are going and shooting places up now? So we can infer by that the communists do have guns, which is going to be surprising for some people who are for some reason convinced that communists don't have guns, but they do. And apparently they're shooting up college campuses in Florida. That's just great. That's completely effing predictable.
If the criticism of identity politics is that it hardens identities, a queer theory, influenced anarcho-feminism then could be outside of this criticism, and indeed may share it, while still emphasizing the real effects of the group-based oppression. We've been made to believe that human subordination under the law is natural, that we need to be governed. The legitimacy of imposed government is also emphasized through the seemingly natural differences between people. The differences between people have been made significant so as to promote divisions based on domination and subordination. In doing so, those differences must be clear-cut, a border must be drawn between the two, creating a dichotomy so there is no confusion about who is where in the hierarchy. This takes time, centuries even, to really harden our perception of human nature. It takes laws, but worse, it takes discipline, primarily in the form of terror and violence, to pound a sense of hierarchy into us. Despite the possibility that the state and capitalism may be able to function without these imposed borders, the borders must still be destroyed.
Despite the possibility that the state and capitalism may be able to function without these borders, we must still destroy the borders. I love it. Can I just say something completely separate from this document for a second? Have you guys been tracking what's going on with... So I wrote about the other day on my website, I wrote on my Substack about Harvard turning down the Trump administration. Basically, the Trump administration said that they were going to pull $2.2 billion in federal funding from Harvard unless Harvard did what the Trump administration wanted. Harvard told them to go screw and that they weren't going to do it and that the Trump administration was infringing on academic freedom. And now the Trump administration's coming back saying, we're going to take your taxes exempt status away, Harvard, which they actually can't do. And they're trying to do other things too, which they actually can't do. But my bigger question is this. So the Trump administration, I think one of the things they said that they were going to do to Harvard was they were going to restrict their ability to enroll foreign students, like any foreign students, which they can't do. Harvard is a private institution, whether anyone likes it or not. The Trump administration can't just keep restricting their abilities to operate as a private institution, because if they reject federal money, see, this is where the rubber meets the road. I told you guys this was going to happen. The minute that Harvard rejected the federal money is the minute the Trump administration no longer has power. And so now the Trump administration is going to grasp at straws to try to get power back, because they really expected Harvard to bend the knee, which if they knew anything about higher education at all, they should have known that there were going to be universities that weren't going to do this. I knew this because I worked in higher ed for 10 years. Okay. So Harvard has told the Trump administration to fuck off. The Trump administration is now flailing and saying, we're not going to let you enroll any foreign students. Does anyone actually think that Harvard is ever going to have trouble finding students in the United States? Does anyone actually, let's just say, and again, I don't think the Trump administration is going to be successful at this thing that they're trying to do with Harvard, but let's just say that the Trump administration successfully limited Harvard's ability to enroll any foreign students at all. Does anyone actually believe that Harvard is going to have a problem finding students? Harvard accepts less than 10% of the students who apply to Harvard. The Harvard Alumni Network will never allow the value of a Harvard degree to go down, which means that no matter what they do to Harvard, the Harvard Alumni Network, who runs all the elite institutions, are going to continue to hire Harvard graduates. So you can't even say, people are not going to hire Harvard graduates anymore. Yes, they are. Do you know who's going to hire Harvard graduates? Harvard alumni. Because if the value of a Harvard degree goes down, that means the value of the alumni's degree go down, and they're not going to allow that because that hurts them. There is no universe in which Harvard is going to lose this fight. I promise you. Harvard is a behemoth. Harvard owns half of the real estate in the greater Boston area. Harvard has a $60 billion endowment, and an endowment is just a giant pot of money sitting in a bank account accruing interest, and they don't even touch the major pot of money. They just go off the interest. Harvard could have a full class of students just from full pay students in the United States and not have a problem. The hardest part about getting into Harvard is getting into Harvard. Once you're in at Harvard, they don't let you fail. So the hardest part of getting a Harvard degree is getting into the university. And then after that, David Hogg graduated from Harvard. You can be dumb as a box of rocks. And if you get into Harvard because you're a political star child or whatever, they will make sure you graduate from Harvard. That is what that school is like. So, I don't know, man. I think it's stupid what the Trump administration is doing. I think it's inevitable that they're going to lose. And they didn't think it through at all. Let's see. I did see a relevant question from Warhammer. Is there really opposition between white feminists and black feminists? Black feminists are the kind of their own breed, but is there opposition? No, not really. I mean, they're all anti-capitalist at the end of the day, so they're still in solidarity. White feminists will work with black feminists will work with white feminists.
To achieve liberation, we must reject the binary gender system, which divides us into two mutually exclusive categories.
Look at them saying the quiet part out loud as soon as I hit play again. To achieve liberation, which means liberation from capitalism, we must reject the binary gender system, which means men and women, which divides us into two mutually exclusive categories. So they're saying they want to abolish gender. Great.
To achieve liberation, we must reject the binary gender system, which divides us into two mutually exclusive categories. This gender system not only oppresses in the form of a hierarchy of categories, but also in terms of gender expression, holding up masculinity as superior and policing each person into their gender box. The significance of gender-sex differences must be exposed as a political construct, one which has been used to form a cross-class alliance among men, and to make heterosexuality and women's roles and exploitation in the home and family to seem natural. In effect, we are imprisoned by a gender binary, though a sort of freedom may be accessible to some, and if we don't behave appropriately, there are plenty of prison guards to attempt to put us in our place. Clearly, those who do not fit into these gender boxes are seen as a threat and are disciplined through threats or acts of discrimination.
Hang on. Trendolin's trying to me to get to disrupt a live stream. I don't want to disrupt Trendolin. We're doing book club right now. I don't want to disrupt his live stream. I really don't. I just want to do book club. He can rant around and rave around January 6th all he wants. I don't care. Let's just do book club.
Clearly, those who do not fit into these gender boxes are seen as a threat and are disciplined through threats or acts of discrimination, verbal abuse, harassment, and/or violence. I argue not that gender transgression or deviance is in itself revolutionary, but that we must transcend or destroy the gender-based power relations as part of a sort of decolonizing. It is crucial that feminists not reinforce these gender boxes, but also that anarchists not minimize our need to pull these issues from the margins. The existence of these identities created by power relations should not be denied, but instead should be examined and opposed in the context of power. Whereas sex is usually defined by biological differences, gender has been used to describe the prescribed social differences between female and male, defining us as feminine or masculine, traits we can generally agree are not universal throughout time or place. One point of contention among some feminists and gender transgressors is the definition of gender. I agree with others like Kate Bornstein that gender may refer to different concepts, gender roles, gender identity, etc. For lack of a better term. Here I will use the term gender stratum to refer to the hierarchical binary categories of gender. I argue that what is called gender identity is a different aspect of gender, which is separate from, but related to gender stratum. Gender identity, which I will call gender inclination, since identity is problematic here, would have different meaning without gender stratum, but should not be confused as meaning the same thing, despite the fact that the two are conflated by many feminists. We can probably agree that gender stratum is an imposed social construct. We could take it further by questioning whether our concepts of the biological differences between female and male existed before hierarchy, and whether they at least have the same significance before Western culture interpreted the differences we understand today. Point 3. The possibility that there are really no.
Oh, hang on. It just did something weird with the reading, but this is a really important section, and we're going to go back and look at it, and I'll read it. We could take it further by questioning whether our concepts of the biological differences between male and female existed before hierarchy, and whether they at least have the same significance before Western culture interpreted the differences we understand today. So what they're saying is they're acknowledging that there are these biological categories of male and female. They're positing that at one point, these categories of male and female or men and women existed without hierarchy. They're positing there was a time that that was true, a time before capitalism, a time before Western values were imposed on the hierarchies. And then they're saying that at some point, and they don't all agree on when capitalism was created, by the way. There are different opinions on it. But they're saying that at some point, capitalism came in and forced the genders, the biological categories, to become hierarchical where they used to be on the same level. And what they would probably point to is they're going to say indigenous tribes didn't have this, and they're going to claim that indigenous tribes had gender equity, and then the evil Westerners came over and imposed capitalism on the indigenous tribes, and when they did that, they created the gender hierarchy where men were above women that didn't exist before. It's kind of interesting that they're like acknowledging that. They're saying the possibility that there are really no natural differences between the sexes, that those sexes don't exist other than because of political and social reasons, can be troublesome to nearly anyone. So they're saying we understand that there are differences between these sexes, I think. In many ways, these ideas exist exclusively in the realm of academia and have little relevance to people's everyday lives. So there was actually a moment in the queer activist movement where they're like, we're saying some crazy shit that only makes sense in academia and isn't relevant to most people. Look how much more self-reflective they are than the right. They're like, yeah, this is actually pretty nuts. That's funny.
On the other hand, throughout the time humans have existed, there have been diverse ideas about the meanings of the physical differences between those with different organs associated with sex gender.
Those with different organs.
In considering the experiences of intersex people 5 and transgender transsexual people, it only makes sense that a gender-sex continuum should be the basis for an understanding of human nature. Different ideas about gender and sexuality in various cultures, mostly where untouched by Western civilization 6, show us that not only are Western dualistic ideas about gender, sex, sexuality, and accompanying hierarchy atypical and manipulated to manage the people. Social construction of biological sex is more than an abstract observation. It is a physical reality that many intersex people go through. Because society makes no provision for the existence of people whose anatomical characteristics do not neatly fit into male or female, they are routinely mutilated by medical professionals and manipulated into living as their assigned sex. Emi Koyama, The Trans-Feminist Manifesto, 2000.
Oh,
The intersex society.
it's reading a footnote now. Apologies. Let's skip forward.
But also that the argument that modern capitalism accommodates transgressive gender and expressions of sexuality is beside the point. The transition to capitalism was indeed a main driving force of the conquest over different forms of gender expression and sexuality, enforcing a strict gender-sex binary. The likelihood is minimal that we could fully understand the origins of the concept of sex or the beginnings of gender hierarchy, even though this may provide answers about the origins of hierarchy itself. Whether biological characteristics once had neutral meaning or not, significance has been increasingly placed on these differences, creating these sex-gender constructs as part of a hierarchy, and the construction of the divisions between men and women has been an ongoing process. Woman as a different species. Certainly we can say that the language of the witch hunt produced the woman as a different species. Silvia Federici. To understand the construction of a gender binary and hierarchy, we primarily look at Europe because of the ways in which, through colonization imperialism, Europe violently exported its ideas throughout the world.
Wow. So this essay is saying that, can I highlight that? There we go. This essay is saying that Europe constructed the socially constructed categories of men and women. It's all Europe's fault.
Before the witch hunts, European peasant women, having a decent amount of social power despite sexual division of labor and Christian-promoted misogyny, were heavily involved in revolts against feudalism and, later, capitalism.
Ooh!
It is no coincidence, as Silvia Federici describes in her book, Caliban and the Witch, that the witch hunts, which involved the torture and murder of hundreds of thousands of women mostly in the 16th and 17th centuries, occurred in conjunction with the transition to capitalism and the colonization of the Americas. Federici also explains how, over the course of a few centuries, women's exploitation, through their unpaid labor in the home, termed reproduction, as well as slave labor in the Americas, had to be constructed as natural in the setting in which it was in the interest of capitalism to be viewed as voluntary and contractual. By justifying their exploitation, the dehumanization of unpaid laborers allowed capitalists to hide.
So there's an important word in parentheses that it missed. By justifying their exploitation, the dehumanization of unpaid laborers, parentheses, women, allowed capitalists to hide and legitimize the reality that people didn't have a choice in the matter. So they're saying that women, the socially constructed category of women, are the same as unpaid laborers because they haven't raised the children in the home, which they are not paid to do.
The witch hunts were not only counterinsurgency measures. Accusations of witchcraft and prostitution were often made to punish theft and attacks on property, which increased at this time due to land privatization and the exclusion of women from receiving wages. Especially important was capitalism's new demand for workers, leading to the construction of monogamous heterosexual marriage as natural through the forced dependence of women on men, and criminalization of sexual acts that were not for the purpose of reproduction. Peasant women increasingly began to get punished for crimes such as abortion and contraception, and, in the case of witches, also for allegedly causing infertility and impotence in men, in addition to castration and killing children. Queer peasants were disciplined by means of terror in Europe in particular, but also during colonization of the Americas as homosexuals and two-spirit people were killed, and the continuation of these identities practices were averted or forced underground. Federici stresses that while some peasant men participated in and even encouraged these actions against women, and while the church played a strong role, the greater part of the campaign of terror against women would not have been possible without the role and interest of the state. The ruling class's interest in promoting the differences between the sexes is clear, and they accomplished this task by punishing certain behaviors and using terror to discipline women. Early on, European women were defined as unruly, mentally weak, and in need of being controlled. The witch hunts served to reinforce this, but at the same time to discipline women into a new nature, that of the docile, moral, and motherly. It is worth noting that while capitalism played a strong role in shaping what became understood as the nature of women,
Oh, hang on. We need to relish this little paragraph right here. Check this out. It is worth noting that while capitalism played a strong role in shaping what became understood as the nature of women, so it's saying capitalism socially constructed what it means to be a woman, there are obvious examples of how those in power in any economic circumstances, not just capitalism, although I want to know what they mean by that, seek to justify their rule by different means, often controlling sexuality and enforcing gender norms. I mean, what many Marxists would argue, I think, is that that would still be a reflection of capitalism. So that's a little bit, that's an interesting way they worded that. Let's see where that goes.
It is worth noting that while capitalism played a strong role in shaping what became understood as the nature of women, there are obvious examples of how those in power in any economic circumstances seek to justify their rule by different means, often by controlling sexuality and enforcing gender norms. So while the concept of women and men as two different groups existed prior to the witch hunts, there was now a new significance on the difference between the two, functioning as a clear binary.
So the witch hunts in Europe literally created the gender binary? That's one I haven't heard before.
The notion of inflexible divisions between humans had to be beaten into all the people as a whole, thus creating profound alienation between men and women, and marginalization, if not extermination, of those who deviate from the norms. In addition, to compel the people to work under the conditions that capitalism requires involved a sort of conquest involving a new perception of the body as a machine or tool, and through the criminalization of various communal activities and non-productive sexuality. Workers' subordination and women's further subordination were made to seem natural. Even though there seems to be no anti-capitalist historical study of the shaping of men, this clearly was part of the witch hunts, the transition to capitalism, and colonialism as well. In discussing human nature, we need to be critical of the ways that certain concepts such as hierarchy, or a need for hierarchy, are made to seem natural. For instance, Andrea Smith wrote, "Heteropatriarchy is essential for the building of U.S. empire. Patriarchy is the logic that naturalizes social hierarchy. Just as men are supposed to naturally dominate women on the basis of biology, so too should the social elites of a society naturally rule everyone else through the nation-state form of governance that is constructed through domination, violence, and control." In a speech, she said, "This is why in the history of Indian genocide the first task that colonizers took on was to integrate patriarchy into native communities. The primary tool used by colonists is..."
Patriarchy means the gender hierarchy, created by capitalism, of course.
For instance, Andrea Smith wrote, "Heteropatriarchy is essential for the building of U.S. empire. Patriarchy is the logic that naturalizes social hierarchy. Just as men are supposed to naturally dominate women on the basis of biology, so too should the social elites of a society naturally rule everyone else through the nation-state form of governance that is constructed through domination, violence, and control." In a speech, she said, This is why in the history of Indian genocide the first task that colonizers took on was to integrate patriarchy into native communities. The primary tool used by colonists is sexual violence. What sexual violence does for colonialism and white supremacy is render women of color inherently rapeable, our lands inherently
What?
invadable, and our resources inherently extractable.
Wow.
An example of colonization of the New World, being accomplished partly through the promotion of sexual divisions, is the French Jesuits' interactions with natives in Canada with no sense of private property, authority, or male superiority, which according to the French had to change if they were to become reliable trade partners. The French taught Naskapi men to discipline their children, and to bring their women to order. Hunts occurred in parts of the Americas that demonized all natives and Africans, but often focused more on the women. Colonization is an ongoing process which includes patriarchal indoctrination and sexual violence in Indian schools. Gender stratum and race. The sex-gender hierarchy is inseparable from race, colonization, and capitalism.
Oh, yeah? The sex-gender hierarchy is inseparable from race, colonization, and capitalism. It's funny because I posted a video on my Queer Marxism Twitter account, I think it was yesterday, of one of those, like, typical queer activists, the Indian guy with the beard that pretends to be a woman. And he literally said almost exactly the same thing. He said that gender oppression is inseparable from race and colonization, and they didn't use the word capitalism, but they used the word colonization. So this line is directly, I want people to understand this. The reason we read these documents is this line is being used by a very, very well-known Indian queer influencer. And I mean, almost word for word. And we know where it comes from. It comes from these documents.
The sex-gender hierarchy is inseparable from race, colonization, and capitalism. For example, female slaves were treated pretty much the same as male slaves, up until importing slaves was made illegal, at which time female slaves were made more often to breed and were increasingly subject to the sexual violence of white men. Aspects of femininity, defined here as culturally socially dictated as appropriate for real women, were constructed as a distinguishing mark of class, much like landscaped yards that demonstrate that the owners need not use their land to grow food. Women who didn't have to work were to be unnaturally weaker, delicate, dependent, lily-white, housebound, and therefore, the making of the white race involved the politicized unmaking of women to fit into white. Race is.
I want to remind people in the chat because I'm starting to see people debunk things. I know the urge to debunk things is very strong, but I promise you, your debunking will result in actually no change. All it does when you debunk something is you are inhibiting your ability to learn what their perspective is. Okay? So you are literally doing nothing to them when you debunk their stuff. What you are doing is using your energy in a way that might make you feel temporarily good and morally superior and intellectually superior, but you're not actually learning anything and you're not retaining the information. I promise you. The people who debunk all the time are the people who never actually learn, because you need to be putting your energy into learning and understanding their perspective. I'm not suggesting you agree with their perspective. We don't agree with their perspective, but if you don't learn their perspective, then there's literally nothing you can do about it. So please resist the urge to debunk. You will get over the habit after a while.
Race is also a political and social construct. Understanding one politico-social construct can help us better understand another. Bacon's Rebellion, which was a more significant one of many rebellions in which European indentured servants and African slaves joined together, frightened the state of Virginia into passing a series of laws specifically outlining the freedoms accessible to Europeans Christians versus Africans. In doing so, they created race. Slavery was the most profitable form of labor.
Hang on. What? Bacon's Rebellion, which was a more significant one of many rebellions in which European indentured servants and African slaves joined together, frightened the state of Virginia into passing a series of laws outlining the freedoms accessible to Europeans and Christians versus Africans. In doing so, they created race. That's an incredible. Oh no, I wasn't ready for you to talk yet. That's actually like an incredible line.
Bacon's
No,
Rebellion.
I was trying to highlight. I'm just trying to highlight right now. I don't want you to talk. Don't talk. There we go. So what they're saying, how many times have we talked about the idea that whiteness means capitalism? Whiteness means capitalism. Whiteness is not about skin color. Whiteness means capitalism. The reason that whiteness means capitalism is every time the left is referring to whiteness or white supremacy or racism, they are not referring to your individual skin color. They are referring to the system that upholds racism. That is what systemic racism means. It means the system that upholds racism. Institutional racism means the institution that upholds racism. They believe that racism was created by the system, not by the skin color, by the system. What they're telling you here is that lawmakers in Virginia created race. When they passed laws, when you pass laws, you are doing it on a systemic level. When they pass laws specifically outlining the freedoms accessible to Europeans and Christians versus Africans, what they're saying is the people in the capitalist US or the capitalist government, because they believe that all government in the United States is capitalist, the legislators in the capitalist government passed laws that impacted one category of people, white, Christian, European, whatever, more than they impacted other types of people, Black, Africans, etc. That creates a hierarchy. The European Christians are on top of the hierarchy. The Black Africans are on the bottom of the hierarchy. It's not necessarily, I know it seems like it's about skin color, but they're not actually talking about the skin color. They're talking about the laws that treated people with skin color different, the different categories differently. And in acknowledging the categories and in saying this category of people can do X, Y, B, and Z, and this category of people can't do X, Y, B, and Z, they created the hierarchy. That is the problem that they have with it. Okay? If the law had created something in which Black people owned all the property and white people were not allowed to buy property, they would also have a problem with that, because in the creation of that law, Black people would be on top of the hierarchy and white people would be on the bottom of the hierarchy. And again, it really has nothing to do with like white being better than Black or Black being better than white. It's the fact that the capitalist government created a system via the passage of a law that put one category of people over another category of people. Please let me know if you guys have questions about this. It's important that people understand the distinction. This is why whiteness means capitalism. Because it's not about your skin color. It's not about white being better than Black. It's about the system of the capitalist government creating a law that impacted one category of people in a different way than another category of people, thus creating a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is the problem.
Bacon's Rebellion, which was a more significant one of many rebellions in which European indentured servants and African slaves joined together, frightened the state of Virginia into passing a series of laws specifically outlining the freedoms accessible to Europeans, Christians versus Africans. In doing so, they created race. Slavery was the most profitable form of labor in colonial Virginia, but racial slavery was the solution to the threat of servile insurrection and the problem of how to efficiently and peacefully get the workers, slave and free, to work. Race emerged from the needs of the Virginia upper class to craft a docile and productive labor force. But as the benefits of white...
So race was about crafting a productive labor force.
Slavery was the most profitable form of labor in colonial Virginia, But racial slavery was the solution to the threat of servile insurrection and the problem of how to efficiently and peacefully get the workers, slave and free, to work. Race emerged from the needs of the Virginia upper class to craft a docile and productive labor force. But as the benefits of whiteness became apparent to English laborers, they came to embrace the system by which privileges were conferred in exchange for policing slaves.
Oh,
While
there's the
prejudices and
police.
ideas about superiority based on differences existed prior, this invention of whiteness created a new significance on physical differences that had a particular function to form a cross-class alliance among white people which still exists today.
So what they're saying is that when Virginia passed the laws that made more things accessible to white people, European Christian people, than Black Africans, what they did was they created a system which incentivized people with white skin to see themselves as superior and to protect the privileges that they had attained through the creation of race via the system. So it's actually kind of funny. They're saying that it was the system of capitalism which created the system of systemic racism, which actually created white supremacy, because all of a sudden, all these white people who were put into this socially constructed category had an incentive to try to work together to maintain the extras that they got as a result of the laws based on capitalism. Does everyone understand this? I know we're getting late in the day. People are dwindling. We're going to get through this essay. But if you do not understand this, please let me know, because again, this is fundamental. You must understand the distinction between these things in order to understand the left.
Slavery was the most profitable form of labor.
No, we're going to go down here.
The shaping of the categories of race and sex was part of a longer history of hierarchy. Additionally, just as the specific era of the witch hunts lasted a couple centuries, so too was the construction of race an ongoing process, like in the example of the Irish not being included into whiteness until later. Also, after the Civil War, lynching was a prominent way to terrorize, to discipline black people into submission. Before lynching could be consolidated as a popularly accepted institution, however, its savagery and its horrors had to be convincingly justified. These were the circumstances which spawned the myth of the black rapist, for the rape charge turned out to be the most powerful of several attempts to justify the lynching of black people, wrote Angela Davis. She explains further in her book Women, Race, and Class, however irrational the myth may be, it was not a spontaneous aberration. On the contrary, the myth of the black rapist was a distinctly political invention. This also contributed to white women's fear of black men, and was part of the precedent set which began to criminalize people of color, leading to the high rates of people of color in U.S. prisons today. Despite there being major limitations to drawing parallels between race and gender stratum, the construction of these dichotomies allows us to see partly how hierarchy functions. Those in power divide the people on the basis of a physical difference and amplify the significance of those differences through criminalization and limitations of legal and economic freedoms, as well as through violence, while affording the favored group freedom from most repression. This process functions to make natural the divisions and hierarchical positions of those it involved. A cross-class alliance, rewarded with privileges, undermines anti-authoritarian resistance and class solidarity. In the case of women, I should point out that male privilege includes man's ability to dominate the women in his family, which can be seen as more personal while being, in effect, political. Gender liberation for everyone. The naming of political advantages of whiteness or maleness as privileges is a problem, however.
Oh, yeah?
If the way I described hierarchies functioning is accurate, it would not really be in the interest of the favored working class group to participate in an alliance with the rich rulers, since that means they will perpetually be ruled and exploited.
True.
White people have a responsibility to themselves to abolish whiteness for these reasons and to be fully human, in addition, of course, to the
I love it. I love it. They're like, white people, you need to be some good allies to help us abolish this system that gave you all these privileges.
White people have a responsibility to themselves to abolish whiteness for these reasons and to be fully human, in addition, of course, to the responsibility to end racism. Similar to the case of white people, when men participate in domination, they do themselves harm. While folks assigned male at birth who don't comfortably fit into their assigned gender box are certainly affected by gender oppression, the ones who do conform would also benefit from undermining the ways gender hierarchy has been naturalized through the socialization of boys and men. They can hardly be free, and the relationships they have with others cannot be fulfilling as long as emotions are suppressed. Competitive masculinity has to be established, and inequality must be maintained with women. Yet why would men choose to change if they are consistently told they are privileged? Bell Hooks asks.
That's a good question.
To change means, for one, that men would have to overcome their training to deny their emotions. Implicating women as well as men in perpetuating this damage done to males through parenting, Hooks wrote, homophobia underlies the fear that allowing boys to feel will turn them gay. Whereas feminism tends to imply a fight by and for women, it is, then, also in the interest of men to oppose gender oppression and homophobia heteronormativity, rather than perpetuate it. It also means that feminism, for lack of a better word, must also address the situation of men.
Wow.
While it is clear that men largely benefit from this system while women do not, it clearly functions by enforcing this gender border along with the concepts man and woman. We must not, then, continue to reinforce these false concepts as binary, essential, stable, and universal categories.
So again, it's all coming back to the abolition of the categories of men and women.
Clearly, even though viewing women as a socially constructed gender sex within a hierarchy is useful, caution must be taken to avoid a sort of essentialism or sense of universal experience of this oppressed group. Some feminists who see sex gender as a hierarchical social construct do not accept any other definition of gender, which leads to major disagreements over gender identity. Some might argue that a realization of gender fluidity, rather than a dichotomy, would perhaps accomplish the task of undermining the political construction of gender-sex categories for the purpose of domination. This deserves further examination. If we argue, as some have, that hierarchical binaries like man-woman and white-black are created to naturalize hierarchy, this implies that a hierarchy existed prior. Therefore, while it may have been less acceptable to people, this hierarchy existed nonetheless. So the task is surely not simply to abolish the binaries constructs. Yet again,
hang on.
there is
hang on, be quiet. Amy's got a question. Do they consider all religious beliefs to be capitalistic or just Christians? Generally speaking, what they believe is that people only need religion as a coping mechanism for capitalism. And so they do believe that all religion is going to just like naturally die off when they abolish capitalism. I think that the reason that they focus on Christian in this context is it's in the context of the category of European, but they're not like pro other forms of religion. They think that religion is just like a coping mechanism that people use and that they don't really need because of how bad the world has made capitalism, essentially.
Yet again, there is only so much we can know about the origins of the concept of man and woman, aside from the ways in which they have more recently been made more significant. In this argument for rejecting the binary gender system, it should not be understood to mean that no one should identify as a man or a woman, much less that we should vaguely smash gender or implement some utopian androgyny.
Okay.
A truly liberatory position on gender sex requires self-determination of gender identity, inclination, and free.
Okay, so again, and people have asked me this. They're like, Karlyn, are they going to outlaw identifying as a gender? No. They're not going to outlaw it. they're going to say, listen, if you want to identify as a woman, if that feels good to you, you can identify as a woman. You can use she, her pronouns. We don't care. If you want to identify as a man, if that feels good to you, you can identify as a man and you can use he, him pronouns. But if you don't want to identify as one of those things because you see those things as a socially constructed category based on capitalism, then you could have this whole other world of possibilities open to you where there's an infinite number of genders and you can change your gender all the time. And as long as you acknowledge that it is not just about men and women, then you can identify as whatever you want, including men and women. So what they think, so how they're going to create their perfect non-binary society, they're not going to do it from mandating on high and saying, thou shall not be men or women. What they're going to do is teach kids that gender is a social construct over the course of their entire childhood. And then those kids are going to grow up and they're going to be like, I can be whatever gender I want. Why would I be a man or a woman? That's really boring. That's not exciting. That's not unique. That's not different. That's not expressing myself as a unique and beautiful snowflake. So it will be more of a natural, gradual process where there is, you're not going to be incentivized to identify as like a man or a woman. There's going to be social pressure not to, but it's also going to be like one of those things where they think it's just going to like die out. And regardless of if it does completely die out or not, as long as the idea of gender not being binary and you can identify as like whatever you want, as long as that prevails, that's really kind of, I think, all that they're looking for.
A truly liberatory position on gender-sex requires self-determination of gender identity, inclination, and freedom from coercive gender assignment. Everyone's experiences and sense of identity should be incorporated into an idea of what gender means. One's inclination for femininity, for example, should not be dismissed or devalued by others who don't relate to it. Additionally, most trans people face dangers if they diverge much from the standard ideas of femininity, and therefore have to pass by conforming in order to survive, despite critical awareness by many about gender hierarchy and heterosexism. That said, we need to dismantle gender stratum to separate the power dynamics attached to gender, in that masculinity often means domination and femininity, subordination. Since men are taught to be dominating, that this is equated with masculinity, we need to make a particular point to change this. Men are denied their emotions, and as Bell Hooks writes, patriarchy both creates the rage in boys and then contains it for later use, making it a resource to exploit later on as boys become men. As a national product, this rage can be garnered to further imperialism, hatred, and oppression of women and men globally. At the very least, it teaches men in general to be apathetic about the plight of others. Because it is instilled in men that their nature requires them to be dominating, we must extract the domination imperative from what it means to be a man. Hooks distinguishes patriarchal masculinity from masculinity, and this deserves further consideration. Without the naturalization of a man-woman dichotomy, masculinity and femininity, and all their various meanings.
Hang on, Illustration Station has a question. So the dislike of individualism isn't about being unique, it's about not supporting the collective. Am I getting that right? Yeah, no, and you can always ask questions like this. You're not disrupting the stream. This is what this is for. They don't like the concept of individualism because individualism means capitalism. You cannot have capitalism, which is individual private wealth that is exclusive to the individual, without individualism. So individualism creates a reality in which you own your home, you own your land, you own your stuff. You might have a business that you're not giving the profits away from your business. You're keeping those profits for yourself. That is what they see when they see individualism. It is the ability to amass individual privatized wealth that is not available to the collective. But in terms of like, there's nothing wrong with being unique. They are unique. If you look at them, they all look different, right? They all have their own unique look. It's not about being different than the collective. It's about, are you sharing your resources with the collective? Do you have access to anything that the collective doesn't have access to? That's what the issue is.
Without the naturalization of a man-woman dichotomy, masculinity and femininity, and all their various meanings are either exposed as social only and or as more about individual tendencies of personality and affinity. It is this domination that should be opposed, no matter who is doing it or in what form. No one ought to identify domination as part of who they are, nor should women excuse their own participation in domination just because they believe they cannot be oppressors. This applies to male privilege, hetero privilege, class privilege, white privilege, etc., in addition to hierarchies perhaps inadvertently created by those judging others as not revolutionary, queer, or gender nonconforming enough. In the past, there was an expectation that the radical lesbian movement would strongly threaten the dominant order. In fact, it has been viewed as a threat, but as we can see, it has been defeated, recuperated, or co-opted under the larger system of domination. If much of radical feminism, lesbianism, was really the only real threat to the system, then it served the dominant order to marginalize the particularly militant tendencies and or those of women of color, or divert the movements to re-embrace essentialism, which reinforced the order of things. Some radical feminists were certainly on to something. According to Celestine Ware, a black woman activist who was...
Hang on, I got another question. With the mass and the pandemic obsession, do they expect everyone to take some meds, aka vaccines? They absolutely have the expectation that everyone wears a mask. They have the very strong recommendation that you be vaccinated. But what I will say is I went undercover at socialist events they still think the pandemic's going, but I've been undercover at multiple socialist events since the start of the pandemic. They have never required my vaccine papers to go to their events. What they have required is that I wear a mask. They very strongly say you need to take a COVID test, and here, we'll even give you a COVID test before you come to our event. There are some events you go to, and they're just a stack of COVID tests on the table, and they're like, has everyone had their COVID test? Okay. But I've never actually been to a far left event that required me to show vaccine papers, even though they strongly recommend it. So I wouldn't say that, you guys think that that all leftists were trying to force everyone to get the vaccine. But again, the far left is actually fairly consistent on the whole my body, my choice thing. Now, Democrats and liberals and progressives, this is another story because those are different groups. But when it comes to the far left, they do actually have a very strong kind of inclination towards bodily autonomy, but they also think that you should behave responsibly given the role in the collective. So take that for it's an interesting question to think about, because I was like, did they actually go hard on vaccines? And I don't know that they didn't require it for their events. And a lot of places did. There were some right-leaning places that required it for their events, but they didn't. I don't know.
According to Celestine Ware, a black woman activist who was quoted in Bell Hook's feminist theory, From Margin to Center, Radical Feminism, postulates that the domination of one human being by another is the basic evil in society. Dominance in human relationships is the target of their opposition. Hook's comments, as feminist movement progressed, critiques of the notion of power as domination and control were submerged as bourgeois activists began to focus on women overcoming their fear of power. Attributing violence and abuse to the nature or necessary political position of men gives women the opportunity to participate in domination while insisting that they can do so in a more ethical way. In addition, this attitude makes male violence seem inevitable and allows us to avoid critical thinking about systemic institutional oppressions, such as the likelihood that capitalism and the state promote rape.
Oh, capitalism promotes rape. I wasn't expecting to hear that today, but okay. Real Deal says, I truly wonder how many of these people do charity work. Significantly more people on the left do what they would call charity work than the right. Significantly more. That's what mutual aid is. The left is filled with mutual aid networks. Mutual aid networks are where leftists will show up and give you money or resources that are accrued outside of the capitalist system to help you literally survive under capitalism. So again, this is again what we're going to call a conservative bullshit talking point. It's the right trying to feel morally superior to the left without actually understanding the left. The left is filled with many more mutual aid networks than the right has. The right doesn't have any of this stuff. In fact, by the standard of like the sheer volume, like just Google mutual aid sometime and see how much shit comes up. So
In addition, this attitude makes male violence seem inevitable and allows us to avoid critical thinking about systemic institutional oppressions, such as the likelihood that capitalism and the state promote rape. If rape is natural to men, then the survivors can rationalize that their only recourse is through the state. Yet prisons and
if rape, are you shitting me? This document is making the argument that rape is natural to men because capitalism socialized them to be dominant. Wow. That's crazy. Oh shit. What just happened? What did just happen? Why did you do that? Hang on. We'll go right back to where we were. It's fine. I don't know why it just reloaded for no reason. We're like almost done this essay. Hang in there. Hang on. It's coming back. Okay, we're back. I think.
In addition, acknowledging that being a woman, queer, or transgressing gender boxes, and/or having feminist or anarchist politics does not make one necessarily incapable of being a perpetrator of abuse and sexual assault, we must see this as a larger project of addressing issues of consent. Additionally, uniting around the freedom to choose what will be done or not done to or with our bodies ties together many people's struggle. As far as identity politics go, there must be some focus on identity in the sense that there are very real effects of these unreal constructs.
We talked about this earlier. The far left does not like identity politics. The only reason the far left even talks about identity is because they're saying there are all these fake categories that have been created, so we have to talk about the fake categories to get rid of the fake categories, but we don't believe in the fake categories. We don't believe in any categories. So these are, again, like they're showing you their disdain for identity politics and their kind of like lamentation that why do we even have to have this conversation at all? These categories never should have been created in the first place.
As far as identity politics go, there must be some focus on identity in the sense that there are very real effects of these unreal constructs. Yet the point is to understand the gender and race divisions not only to end gender and race oppression, but to end domination totally, to undermine these cross-class alliances created in the process of power seeking to naturalize its...
Okay, Amy in Connecticut is confused. Wait, but they just says men's natural tendencies are to want to rape. The reason that is because capitalism created the social construct of men, which socialized men to be dominant, which is why they have the quote-unquote natural inclination to rape. They're not saying it was an innate thing. They're saying that inclination was created via the socially constructed category of male. Do you understand the difference? They're not saying that a body gets born with a penis and then wants to rape everything. They're not saying that. They're saying it's because of the social construction of the category that they have those urges, but not that it was natural. Yes, exactly. It was impressed into men by capitalism. You got it.
Yet the point is to understand the gender and race divisions not only to end gender and race oppression, but to end domination totally, to undermine these cross-class alliances created in the process of power seeking to naturalize itself, its law, and its division. Certainly capitalism, with the state, made the divisions between genders and races politically significant in a way that they never had been before. This shows that much of the racism and sexism that has existed in the last few centuries is not innate, not organic, not grassroots, but rather manufacture. Part of this struggle will be in exposing the ways in which our beliefs have been shaped in the interest of power, that many of the things we consider to be natural are in fact not just man-made, but state-made. Illuminating the ways that our oppression is not natural can be done partly through the actual demonstrations and experiences of gender fluidity and queerness, sometimes referred to with other concepts as queer. Queer is an identity that problematizes the manageable limits of identity.
Queer is an identity that problematizes the limits of identity, because queer has no inherent limit.
Why queer is a territory of tension, defined against the dominant narrative of white hetero. To gender is also a threat to lesbianity.
Hang on.
Monogamous patriarchy, but also by an affinity with all who are marginalized, otherized, and oppressed. In the sense that queer is unstable and destabilizing, it has much potential. Clearly
queer is unstable and destabilizing because, remember, the definition of queer is always relational to the definition of normal. So queer is not a fixed definition. Queer is a fluid definition based on what is considered to be normative at the time.
Clearly, the refusal to participate in privileging political relations would not be co-opted. We know that LGBTQ is co-opted just as feminism is, and therefore the potential lies in the ways in which queer is not co-optable. Where identity politics seeks inclusion for its respective group, it chooses participation in domination and reinforces binaries. Would a rejection of inclusion and participation be the antithesis of identity politics, even if it were a politics that focused on a specific group-based oppression? Gender transgression alone may or may not succeed at destroying the gender hierarchy. If it does, it is because it is able to render the binary meaningless. Yet few are so optimistic about this possibility, since it would probably require a lot of participation and clear intent because of this co-optability of transgressions of gender and sexuality by the power structure.
Yep.
However, I argue that binary gender and compulsory heterosexuality have to be destroyed because they regulate us all into our gender and sexuality boxes, limiting our ability to be liberated and to participate in resistance. It is necessary to come up with new ways of resisting gender oppression patriarchy without reinforcing the idea that woman is a useful category to organize around. Finally, the exposure of gender sex as a social construct on which a binary hierarchy was naturalized and functions through cross-class race alliances may activate a clearer general understanding of how this occurs, thereby allowing white women, for example, to better see how whiteness functions similarly, crumbling multiple constructs at once. Imagining new possibilities for gender, race, and power economic relations is necessary for liberation.
Hey, we made it to the end of the essay! Congratulations! You guys completed Counterrevolutionary Book Club for today. We read 2 essays. We are ending, next time we will pick up with The Anarchy Without Opposition, and this is going to be on page 45 of Queering Anarchism. But it's kind of like a lot of the same. I wasn't doing a lot of commentary because it's kind of like we've heard all this stuff before, but it is important that we hear it because it's important that people recognize that this is the pattern. The pattern is all about abolishing the gender binary, abolishing the gender binary, abolishing the gender binary. Queer is about abolishing the gender binary. They want to abolish the gender binary because they believe that abolishing the gender binary will eventually lead to the abolition of the nuclear family. They also want to abolish all the things that are related to those because they believe that the nuclear family socially reproduces capitalism. through social reproduction theory. And the only way to stop the social reproduction of capitalism is to abolish the nuclear family via abolishing the gender binary, via abolishing capitalism. Hope that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, it's probably because I said it really fast, because I've said this stuff a million times. So ask questions if it doesn't make sense. But I want you guys to see that it is not just one or two little papers that say abolish the gender binary, abolish the gender binary. It is everything. It is everywhere. And so if you are listening to an influencer or someone who's claiming to be an expert talk about queer theory, the way you can know whether or not to believe them or whether or not they actually even know what they're talking about is to ask them about the abolition of the gender binary and how that relates to queer. That will tell you everything you need to know about someone. If someone is out there, James Lindsay, saying queer is about sexualizing children, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They don't. It's not about sexualizing kids. That's a problem. It's a different problem. It's a different category of problem. And when that is all that you focus on, you miss that they're saying over and over and over again, abolish gender, abolish gender, abolish gender, abolish gender, abolish gender. That is what they're pushing. So, thank you guys for another great episode of the Counterrevolutionary Book Club. I will be getting this stuff up over on the Substack. I apologize for not getting last week's episode up. I will be uploading that tonight. It's ready to go. I just haven't uploaded it yet. And so you'll be able to access both last week's episode and this one coming up over on the Substack, which is window, share. There we go. Which is Karlyn, Karlyn.substack.com. If you have the Substack app, you can actually listen to the podcast in the Substack app. Just go to Book Club, and this is where you will access the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club podcast. We've got back episodes of the podcast. You can listen to the back episode, at least the first back episode at the moment, on queering anarchism. Apparently, I've got another episode to upload as well. I think I've got episode 2 around somewhere. I don't know what the heck. Oh, I think that was the last one. That was the last one that we did. Never mind. I just realized I mislabeled that. I think I called it part 3. It was really part 2. We just did part 3. So you can find that over on the Substack, and it does have links to Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Look for the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club wherever you listen to your podcast. You will be able to get these episodes. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, give it a 5-star review. That really does help things out. I will be back tomorrow, and tomorrow we are going to do happy hour. And so we're going to watch something fun, and we're going to make fun of it. And it's probably going to be that new podcast with Colin Wright and Brad Palumbo or Palermo. I don't know how to say his last name. Brad. We're just going to call him Brad. He looks like a Brad. We're going to watch that tomorrow for 5 p.m. for happy hour. I cannot believe it is almost Friday already. What a week. What a week. What a week it's been. All right, guys. I'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for hanging out with me. Take care, and we will see you guys then. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you here?
That's difficult to answer.
clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.